President Kranz, it's 5 o'clock. Would you like us to start the recording?
Who said something? Oh, yes.
Ready?
Yes, if you are. I would like to call to order this meeting of the San Diego Water District Board of Directors for October 20th, 2021 at 5 p.m. And would the clerk please call the roll?
Hensey,
Present.
Board Member Lyons,
Here.
Board Member Mosca. Here. President Kranz. Here. Let the record show that with the exception of Vice President Blakespear, all members are present.
Okay,
Just to continue, also, just to note, the San Diego Water District Board members receive an independent stipend of $100 for convening the Water District meetings pursuant to San Diego Water District Resolution number 89-07.
Okay, thank you. And if you'll all now rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, thank you. Tonight we have no special presentations or proclamations, and it doesn't appear that we have any oral communications.
No oral communications at the moment.
Okay, and are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes to the posted agenda.
Thank you. So that takes us to the consent calendar, items 8A through 8C, and I would entertain a motion.
President Kranz, I'll move the consent calendar.
I'll second that.
Okay, if we could please vote.
Trying to figure out how to do that.
Yeah.
There you go. Then you hit record.
The motion carries unanimously with Vice President Blakespear absent.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to action items. We will begin with item 10A, which is the San Diego Water District's 2022 Water System Master Plan. And Senior Civil Engineer Olson will present this item.
Thank you, President Kranz, members of the board. This item is to present the district's 2022 Water System Master Plan. The master plan provides an overall picture of the district's distribution system by evaluating items such as existing and projected water demands, fire flow requirements, and storage. The district master plan was last updated in June of 2010. On May 20th, 2020, the district board authorized Infrastructure Engineering Corporation to prepare the district's master plan. IEC teamed up with HDR to prepare the update. Some new elements included in this master plan include the city's zoning plan of the new R30 overlay projects, the very high fire hazard severity zone, system water age, and a detailed condition assessment and asset management plan. Based upon the results of the hydraulic model and the asset management study, a prioritized 10-year CIP project was developed. I will now hand the presentation over to IEC and HDR to discuss the development and the results of the district's 2022 Water System Master Plan. The board will then discuss the information presented and vote to accept the report.
Thank you, Christina. Good evening, board members. I'm Rob Weber with IEC. I'm the principal in charge for this project. I'll just briefly introduce the rest of our team that's here tonight. Jia Huang was the lead engineer on the master plan project. To my right, to her right is Joel Engelson of HDR. He was the lead hydraulic modeler on the project. And to my left is Dave Spencer. He performed the pipeline condition assessment work. So, next slide. So just an overview of what we did in your master plan project is we updated the hydraulic model based on the existing GIS database and what the current demands were. We developed the future water demands. We did a thorough review of the district's design criteria, including the storage and fire flow requirements, performed a hydraulic analysis and a water age analysis of the entire system, and looked at the impact of the very high fire hazard severity zone to the system fire flow, to what that would do to your fire flow. Performed a storage and interconnects analysis, so looking at what volume of storage the district needs versus what volume of storage the district has, and what available supply you could get from your neighboring agencies through existing interconnects. Performed a desktop pipe condition assessment based on the information available. And then that all culminated with development of a 10-year capital improvement program. Next slide. So just a very brief orientation on this, this graphic before you, and I won't spend too much time on this very engineer-ish looking figure. The numbers on the left side of the graphic denote elevation above sea level, and this is essentially a hydraulic schematic of your water system. So at the top left, shows the incoming water from the San Diego County Water Authority and or Lake Hodges to your Badger plant. From the Badger plant, the water enters the clear well at elevation 520, and then through two transmission mains, the water flows by gravity to your 520 pressure zone. So 520 denoting the elevation of the water surface in that pressure zone. And then through a series of pressure reducing valves and pipelines, the remainder of the pressure zones in the system are fed by gravity. So it's almost exclusively a gravity-fed system that's not reliant on pumping.
So as part of the master plan, we reviewed the district's design criteria with respect to the allowable velocities, pressures, head loss, fire flow requirements, and storage criteria. The fire flow requirements are based on the land use classification, and we also consider the areas within the very high fire hazard severity zone that has a fire flow requirement of 2,500 gallons per minute. The storage criteria includes operation storage, fire protection storage, and emergency storage. The operation storage moderates fluctuations during normal operations and is estimated to be 42% of the average day demand. And the fire protection storage is estimated using the highest fire flow requirements times duration. And the emergency storage is 1 day of the average day demand. Next, please. So here is a chart that shows the district's historical demand and supply trend for the past 10 years. And there's a noted decrease post-2015, most likely due to the statewide water conservation regulations and the district's continuous efforts on water conservation and efficiency. The demand projection in the district's 2020 Urban Water Management Plan was utilized for this master plan's demand projection as shown in this table here. The 2040 potable water demand is estimated to be 6,404 acre-feet. Next, please. Based on the provided development information, we locate the future developments in the system and calculate their demands for the future system hydraulic analysis. And we also identify the large water users within the system using the 2020 water billing records. And the large water users are users that use 10,000 gallons or more water per day on average. Next, Joe is going to talk about the hydraulic model and evaluation.
So the hydraulic model evaluation was conducted by taking the district's hydraulic model, updating the model with existing and projected demands, updating the model with GIS information for recent pipe upgrades to the system. And the model was also updated based on wildfire hazard severity zone demands. So we took the updated model and compared model output with SCADA data for tank levels, shown in this graphic here, to adjust operational conditions in the model to match what's going on in the actual system. So once we validated the model based on the SCADA data, we ran several operational analyses, including minimum day, average day, max day, peak hour, and fire flow. We also ran a storage analysis and a water age analysis. Next slide. So based on our analyses, we found no deficiencies under typical operational conditions, including average day, max day, and peak hour demands. We did find some deficiencies based on fire flow. The fire flow requirements are based on velocity and pressure criteria. So most of the deficiencies were based on velocity criteria in the system. We found that all hydrants in the system are projected to be able to supply at least 500 gallons per minute, but there were some deficiencies based on velocity. And we also included the fire hazard severity zones in that fire flow analysis. Next slide. For the storage evaluation, based on the criteria discussed earlier, including operational emergency and fire flow storage, we calculated required storage in the system at approximately 9.4 million gallons. The system currently has 14 million gallons of storage, so we project that through 2040, the demand projection horizon, that the system has adequate storage. Next slide. We also conducted an interconnects analysis based on the 13 interconnections with neighboring agencies in the system. Interconnection capacity was based on velocity criteria and the infrastructure, including piping and valves in the interconnects. So this isn't meant to replace all system demands. It's just meant for emergency breaks and repairs to the system, so that certain areas of the system can be isolated and interconnects can be used to provide flow. Most of the interconnects are in the 520 zone, so the emergency flow can gravity feed to the remainder of the system. So, next slide. We also conducted a water age analysis. We found that in the lower zones of the system, including the 240 zone, we have water age approaching 10 days. Currently, operations staff flushes in these areas of the system to maintain water quality. We project that water age will improve as demands increase through the projected horizon. We recommended adding flushing devices to automate the flushing that's currently done by operations staff. But besides that, we had no recommendations to improve water age.
All right, now we're going to shift gears from capacity improvements towards aging infrastructure. As you know, you own a lot of water main infrastructure. If you were to replace it all today, it would cost almost $500 million. That infrastructure, over time, as it ages, it will deteriorate, it will break more often, and ultimately, it'll need to be replaced. Now, if you applied industry-published useful life information to your system, it would say that you need to be spending about $7.8 million per year on pipeline replacement. However, we know that that's neither reasonable nor affordable for your particular community. First, because age alone is a poor predictor of condition, but secondly, because your system is performing so darn well, about 5 times better than the county average here in San Diego, and about 20 times better than the average in the US. Part of the reason for that is good operational practices to minimize pressure surges in the system, but also the fact that you have soils that are particularly amenable to longer life within your system. So if you look at the district system, on the left, you can see a map of the salt content of your soils. And basically, salt content can accelerate the deterioration of your pipelines. And what you see within your system is a lot of grays and greens, and that's good for extended life of infrastructure. Whereas if we move to the Midwest, like I've recently worked with San Antonio, you see a lot of reds and orange where they have high salt content within their soils. As a result, even though their pipes are just as old as yours in terms of their AC pipe, theirs are breaking about 50 times more often and will have a much shorter life than your pipe. While your pipes are performing extremely well, we are starting to see signs of deterioration. The district has collected 11 samples to perform direct condition assessment on those. And of those samples, on average, they've lost about 30% of their wall thickness. We've also observed within your break data a modest increase in the break rate over the last 12 or 13 years to about a break rate of about 1.2 annual breaks per 100 miles. Your break data also can help inform how much we should be spending. And so in order to answer the question of how much should the district be spending on their aging infrastructure, we benchmarked a number of utilities, similar utilities, based on break rate here on the x-axis and the percent of the system replaced per year here on the y-axis. And what you see is a pretty standard trend around the country that as a utility's infrastructure starts to break more often and approach the end of its useful life, that utility will choose to replace a larger percentage of the system per year. Currently, the district break rate of about 1.2 puts you right about here on the curve. So again, really, really strong performance. And based on this curve, we would estimate that the district should be replacing about 0.14% of the system per year, or spending about $700,000 per year on their aging infrastructure. So when compared with the age-based estimate of $7.8 million, what we're able to do is get more life out of each and every pipe within your system and save roughly about $7 million per year versus the age-based analysis. We would also expect that this is going to allow the district to cost-effectively sustain service levels into the future while avoiding potential rate shock as infrastructure continues to age and deteriorate. Once we've established prudent investment levels, the next step was to focus those investments to maximize the return on investment for our customers. So the investment is divided into three categories. The first is appurtenance replacement and cathodic protection, basically to extend the life of critical infrastructure to make sure that we can get the most out of it. And that encompasses about 45% of the investment that we're recommending on aging infrastructure. About 6% of the investment is recommended for an opportunistic condition assessment program of your pipes. Basically what this does is it can be very expensive to assess pressure pipe. So the industry standard is to use opportunities whenever a pipe is exposed, whether you're tapping into it for a new service or whether there's a break, to be able to collect that sample and test it and understand how much remaining wall thickness and how much remaining life is left in it. So we would recommend you implement a proactive condition assessment program. And then finally, 49% of the investment is targeted for pipeline replacement. There are three particular projects within the district that while they only make up 1% of the system by length, they include over 48% of all documented breaks. And what we've learned is that if you focus your investments there, replace those pipes that are your trouble pipes, your problem pipes, continuously putting the same folks out of service, you'll get a great return on your investment and be able to sustain those service levels out into the future.
Thanks, Dave. So what Gia, Joel, and Dave just talked about really culminates in the preparation of a proposed capital improvement program. So we have developed that as part of this master plan and have projected a total of $15.9 million in improvements, and we've grouped those into the near term 2022 to 27 and longer term 28 to 32, with 10.3 million of that being near and 5.6 million being the longer term improvements. Next slide. So just a little bit on the development of the CIP. We utilized a unit cost methodology where we developed appropriate unit costs that include the planning, design, the administrative, construction management costs. And the particular challenge with this CIP, while I think Dave had really good news on the condition, is that with these smaller length projects, we do apply a slightly higher CIP unit cost to them, just simply because we're not able to take advantage of the economy of scale of longer projects.
Thank you. This concludes our presentation. We are now available for any questions.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And Board Member Mosca.
Yes, thank you. Thank you guys for the presentation, and thank you for your work on this master plan. Just have a few questions. You talked about interconnections, and how do we view interconnections? Do we view that as essentially a redundancy in the system or solely for emergency purposes? And is there an agreement with those agencies that we would have interconnections with? So in case we do have an emergency, we're able to tap into that interconnection?
I'll start by answering that. The majority of our interconnects are with the Olivenheim Municipal Water District, and typically they're used either in emergencies where we need to supplement our system due to a break and needing to shut down that area, or if we have a planned outage. For example, a few years ago, we replaced some valves on our transmission mains, and we had to shut down part of the system for that. We were able to utilize supplement water from OMWD in order to provide water to our system. We do have agreements in place with these agencies in order to use this water.
Perfect. So do we envision any other interconnections? I see that we have one with Santa Fe and one with OMWD. I mean, it sounds like almost, I mean, it's emergency, but it's also kind of a level of redundancy for the system, which I think is useful in these times. What about Carlsbad? Is there anything that we're thinking about in terms of interconnection with Carlsbad, if there's not one, or any other agency, so that the system is completely looped and redundant?
Our two neighboring agencies are OMWD and Santa Fe Irrigation, and we have maximized the interconnects to the extent possible. With this master plan, we did look at one possible additional interconnect with OMWD. However, the problem is it's at the end of both of our lines, and so we would encounter water quality issues. So we were weighing the pros and cons, but that's definitely something we looked at to provide redundancy to one area of our system. And then as far as Carlsbad, that's the only other semi-neighboring agency, is just to the north of us. And their pipeline stops quite a bit further north than where we are, so it would require quite a bit of improvement to make that connection.
All right. And then just to go back to the forecast of demand, so how do we forecast, just to kind of talk a little bit more about that, how do we forecast the population growth, and how do we forecast what those new neighbors will be using in the future? Are we saying that the past is the predictor of the future?
So in this master plan, we used the values from our urban water management plan, which used the tools provided to us by the County Water Authority in order to project population demand. And that is what we used for this particular study for this master plan. And Gia, I don't know if you want to chime in any further.
So those numbers came from SANDAG?
Correct.
But they weren't informed by any of the planning that we're doing here?
Correct. We did look at the R30 overlay zone to figure out how those additional population would increase demand for those areas, and that was run in the model as well.
All right. Well, and then even if it was done under a single-family kind of analysis, the fact is that if we're having smaller units under the R30 zoning, it would just be surplusage and probably better for the system anyways.
Correct. As was pointed out, our water quality will actually improve as we're getting more development into the area. The downside is, of course, we need to start conserving. So it's kind of checks and balances in trying to make the system work as best as possible.
All right. When we talk about fire deficiencies, we're talking that we need to do more, and this master plan will address that the fire hydrants are not performing where they ought to be performing. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Right, so fire flow demands based on land use per the criteria. So when we ran the hydraulic model, we ran it based on the residual pressure and velocity criteria in the system to estimate the available fire flow at each location. And that's just that predicts system capacity. When we found deficiencies, which mean velocities over a certain 15 feet per second or pressures below 20 psi in the system, under those conditions, we recommended upgrades to the system, which include upsizing pipes or looping the system in order to achieve the criteria.
All right, so it's much more extensive than just fire hydrants. All right.
Right. Yeah, the fire hydrant is the source of the demand, but it's provided by the system.
And then just one last question. So we say that from an age perspective, our pipes are doing really well. So we're not just saying that 50 years, this is what the useful life of this pipe is, but based on our testing, the wall has only lost about 30%. So how do we test them?
So the state-of-the-art testing, the best test for asbestos cement pipe is to pull a coupon out of the wall and perform what's called energy dispersive spectroscopy testing. And it's basically measuring the cement content that's remaining in that wall. And you're measuring it at 10 points along the thickness of the wall to be able to determine which portion of the wall has already deteriorated. It doesn't actually shrink, but you've lost all the cement, so you've lost all the strength. Which part is healthy and where there's active corrosion eating away at the pipe and thinning that pipe wall out. So those are the tests that the district has performed in the past and were very useful for this master plan. What we're recommending is an expansion of that, in particular where opportunities present themselves, because that can 90% of the cost is in isolating the main, traffic control, digging the hole, and restoring it. Once you have that little pipe coupon, sending it to a lab instead of a disposal bin is a relatively small cost to incur. And so by making that improvement 5 years from now, you guys will have a lot more data to truly understand the long-term useful life of your system.
Yeah, so I'm definitely in favor of the opportunistic kind of approach where you're whenever you're out there, that you're looking at those pipes and whatever policy we need to have in place, that ought to be something that we're doing. Do we also send any kind of cameras down there to scope out those pipes? Or is that something that's possible? Because I know on County Water Authority, we have fairly large devices our pipes are 60 inches or larger in diameter, but do we do anything in terms of scoping those pipes out for wall thickness or?
No, the vast majority of your system is AC, and internal inspection is not a cost-effective means for assessing the condition because basically from the inside of the pipe, you will not be able to identify, for example, in metallic pipe, you can identify internal corrosion or you can identify issues with the cement mortar lining, which is why you may put a camera in metallic pipe. But since the vast majority of your system is AC, those putting a camera in a pipe wouldn't really tell you a lot of information, and it would be fairly expensive to do within your system. There are some other advanced proactive condition assessment methods that may be prudent in the future, maybe 5, 10, 20 years from now, as your system deteriorates further. There's a technology that sends acoustic sound waves through it to be able to measure the relative wall thickness, and a couple other condition assessment methods. But at this point, your system is performing so well, we would recommend focusing on expanding your opportunistic program.
Good, good, good. Last question, and that is that, just want to confirm that as we're looking at where the water is coming into the system, we're not taking, and this is for staff, this is not taking into consideration all of the work that would need to be done above that in terms of Lake Hodges or Badger. That's all captured in a separate CIP, not here. Yes. Perfect, thank you.
Board Member Lyons.
Thank you, President Kranz. I want to drill down on something Member Mosca asked, and it's about the fire line pressure challenges. It looked like those were, if I remember the map you have, the highest challenge areas were either higher elevation or ends of the lines. How are you prioritizing how are you proposing to prioritize addressing the fire, water, the deficiencies in the fire flow in the kind of hierarchy of prioritization? Maybe if you could just kind of capture that in the narrative.
So yes, we prioritize the CIPs. So for the top priority, the CIPs are including the pipe replacement that Dave just mentioned, and also the pipe improvements within the very high fire hazard severity zones, because those would be more critical. And then the remaining ones would be in the lower priority.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't clear on that. Just a follow-up question, the map that you showed that showed the 3 projects, which I was understanding to be a high priority. Those projects, I understood you to say are pipe replacement, but they're not the only high priority projects.
Correct. So those are the condition-based projects, and then the other projects are capacity-based, which address the fire flow deficiencies. And those fire flow deficiency projects, we prioritize the ones that locate within the very high fire hazard severity zones as a higher priority. And there's some other areas in the system that also has pipe improvement that has been proposed, but they are not within that very high fire hazard severity zone, so those would be in a lower priority.
Okay, great. Thanks for that clarification. If you said it earlier, I'm sorry I missed it.
No problem.
On the previous slide, I had a question about, it's a map. Let's see, I thought it was previous. That map right there will work. It talks about, your presentation talked about a reservoir at the golf course. And this appears, it says Encinitas Ranch Reservoir, and that appears to be Wonkett Tank. Is there an underground reservoir up by Wonkett Tank? Or is it the reservoir that's at the 12th hole of the golf course?
The one that's on here, the Encinitas Ranch Reservoir, is not Wonkett Tank. It's actually an underground reservoir at the golf course itself.
All right, and don't we have an underground tank at Santa Fe Drive?
Our 2 reservoirs are at Encinitas Ranch, and then there is one we call Belore Reservoir, and it's at Oak Crest Middle School.
And what, the water district owns a piece of property at the I-5 and Santa Fe Drive across the street from the 7-Eleven, and there used to be a tank there, and I thought that tank went underground.
We do not have an existing reservoir there. We just have an above-ground housing unit for one of our pressure-reducing stations, but there is no reservoir located at that site.
Okay. And the staff report talks about the fiscal impact. And I'm wondering if you can kind of walk through that and let me know, we just went through a rate study and we increased the rates. And how does this affect that? What will we need to be doing next time we do a rate study and we do our budgeting? I see some money is budgeted for some of this, and so if you could kind of explain how that all works together.
Sure. So right now we have $1.6 million in our capital improvement budget, and that's just specifically for distribution upgrades. And then in fiscal year 22-23, we're going to add $450,000. And in fiscal year 23-24, we will add another $600,000. In 2025, we're paying off the last of our debt on our bonds. And so at that point in time, we're hoping going forward, we will be able to apply those costs that were allocated towards our CIP budget. And then within these first few years, we will be in design for these projects. So construction will be pushed off a few years until we're able to pad up our CIP budget more.
So we're not anticipating that these needs will be funded through increase in rates. We're hoping that we've got the resources through the retirement of debt to be able to continue to work on this CIP.
Now that we have the master plan completed and we know what our 10-year CIP projects include, we'll be able to look at that at our next rate study and see how that's affected. But hopefully getting rid of that debt services and then being able to apply that money towards our CIP budget will do a great help to increase that CIP budget that we have.
Great, thanks. One kind of dumb question. You talk about this being gravity feed, and I'm confused because Olivenhain is kind of in the low area and then it's got to go uphill. Is it because Badger is a higher elevation that it still pushes the water in a gravity-fed way?
That is correct. So the first schematic that we had up here shows it
Yeah.
really good. Is we see Badger treatment plant and the clear well is at the 520-foot elevation. And then as it travels through our system towards the ocean, it gets lower and lower. And so as it flows through those various zones and pipelines, it's just able to feed downward going from Rancho Santa Fe at the Badger treatment plant down to the ocean.
So even though it has to go uphill, it's got water pushing behind, and that's how the whole gravity-fed thing works. Okay.
Correct, yes.
Yeah. Thanks for that picture. Sometimes crayons work better if you drew me a little picture like that. So, okay. If there are no other questions, and I see none, I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
I'll second.
A motion and a second for staff recommendation to.
Staff, when you're talking about the paying off of the bonds, are you talking about the debt that's owed within the joint facilities? Or is it the joint facilities? All right. I suppose we'll talk about in the future any additional improvements Badger is going to have.
Correct. This master plan is strictly for our distribution system and not for the joint
I
facilities.
know, I just say that because then you brought in the debt from Badger and said that was good, but that's fine.
Motion carries unanimously with Vice President Blakespear absent.
Okay, thank you. So I appreciate all the effort that went into that and great report. Thank you. It's always nice to know that our capital equipment is holding up and doing very well. So item 10B is a discussion of water supply conditions and for the board to consider the declaration of a water shortage response level 1 condition for the San Diego Water District. And Ms. Sam Hirish is going to make this presentation.
Thank you, President Kranz and members of the board. This item is to follow up on our discussion during the last board meeting regarding the water supply conditions in California and to request authorization to declare water shortage level 1 as per the district's water shortage contingency plan. I just want to bring to your attention that you might find some of the information that is going to be presented today is different than what we had in our staff report, just because of the governor's proclamation last night in regards to the drought conditions in California. So there might be some things that have different than we have prepared the staff report a couple of weeks ago. So today's discussion, we will go over the water supply conditions. We will talk about the statewide actions that has been taken, and then the water shortage contingency plan, which is part of the urban water management plan, and then the outreach that our district has done in the past few months and what we will be planning on doing in the next few months. And
Sam,
then, yes,
Could you draw the microphone to you a little closer? There you go.
is that better? Hello? Yep, okay. Sorry about that. And then we will talk a little bit about the proposed drought rates for that we discussed last time too. The state uses the Northern Sierra precipitation chart as part of evaluation of the snowpack and compare it to other years. If you look at the red circle in there, it shows that this year so far it has been, actually the year ended on September 30th, are currently in the second driest year on record, and it's anticipated that next year will also be dry. Oops. This next slide shows the condition of the major reservoirs in California, and as you can see, the Oroville, I don't know if I can pinpoint where it's at, the Oroville is at 22% currently, the level of water in there, and it's 37% of the historic average. I think this picture shows the whole story of what we're going through. This is Lake Oroville in 2018 as compared to Lake Oroville in July 2021. Due to these dry conditions, by July 2021, the governor has declared state of emergency in 50 out of the 58 counties. He also issued an executive order calling on Californians to voluntarily reduce water use by 15% compared to 2020. In August, California reduced urban water use by only 5% compared to August of 2020. Yesterday, the government added the 8 counties, including San Diego, that were not previously included in the drought state of emergency. In addition, in his proclamation, required local water suppliers to implement water shortage contingency plans that are responsive to local conditions and prepare for the possibility of a third dry year. There has been discussions that the state might declare mandatory water use reductions. It is my understanding that the decision has been delayed till early 2022 and will be based on effectiveness of voluntary water conservation efforts and outlook for winter precipitation. Earlier this year, the board adopted the district's water shortage contingency plan, which is part of the district's 2020 urban water management plan. The plan requires suppliers to conduct shortage contingency planning analyses that outline specific actions a supplier will take in response to short-term water supply shortages caused by drought and/or catastrophic supply interruptions. The current plan has 6 shortage response levels. The first level is when there is a shortage of up to 10%, then 20%, and all the way until it's greater than 50%. In addition, each level identifies the measures that will be implemented by the district. Please note that the board approval will be required before implementation of any of these measures. All 6 levels require public outreach program. It's an expanded public outreach program. All measures in level 1 are voluntary measures, and no drought rates and/or fines may be implemented. But that is not the case for level 2 through 6, where the measures are mandatory and drought rates and fines may be implemented. Finance Manager Mary Kazungu will be discussing the details of water shortage level voluntary measures later in the presentation and recommending that the board consider authorizing the general manager to declare shortage response level 1 condition.
Thank you, Issam, and members of the board. In response to the dry conditions throughout the state, but recognizing that San Diego County had not been included among the drought-declared counties, the district has nevertheless intensified its conservation and outreach to customers. Working closely with partners, including the San Diego County Water Authority, the district had been rolling out messaging that emphasizes the investments made by the authority and member agencies over the past 30 years to minimize the threat of multi-year droughts. Next slide. Besides highlighting investments that have kept San Diego County drought safe, conservation education messages have been rolled out onto the district and city web pages, the Facebook page, Nextdoor app, Constant Contact, and more recently, Instagram and Twitter accounts. This slide shows the current conservation education that's geared towards residential customers, which include advising residential customers to water before 10 a.m. and after 6 p.m., discouraging the hosing down of paved surfaces, repairing leaks in a timely manner, and also encouraging customers to fix leaks and reduce water waste. In addition to the residential customer actions, commercial customers are also encouraged to do their part to reduce water waste. Declaring a water shortage contingency level 1 will allow the district to increase communication to discuss the various voluntary measures that customers can take to reduce water demand. These include, as I mentioned previously, to stop hosing down paved surfaces, to stop the runoff of landscape irrigation, washing vehicles with handheld hoses and with hoses that have shut-off nozzles, restaurant only refilling water at the request of customers, etc. This slide shows some of the member agencies of the Water Authority that have already declared a water shortage contingency plan level 1. The Water Authority Board itself will consider declaring a level shortage 1 at its next meeting on October 28th. It's also noteworthy to keep in mind that some of these agencies have remained at a water shortage level 1 or maintained their voluntary measures from the last drought in 2016. Declaring a water shortage contingency level 1 will allow the district to increase communication and to discuss the various voluntary measures that customers can take to reduce water demand. I'll now briefly discuss the drought rates. Drought rates are based on the Urban Water Management Plan as required by the 1983 Urban Water Management Act. The Act requires agencies to outline future water demands under normal and extended dry periods. Drought rates are predicated on the idea that during the extended dry periods, mandatory reductions will be declared and an agency's revenues will also decrease as customers reduce their water consumption. However, the operating costs to deliver water to homes and businesses do not change. The exception is water purchase costs, which would fall as less water is demanded and therefore purchased. Drought rates are only applied to the volumetric commodity charge, not to the water service, to the meter service, or the pass-through charges from the Water Authority. The district last implemented drought rates over an 8-month period from August 2015 through June 2016. At that time, a statewide mandatory reduction of 25% was declared, and the district's target was set by the state at 28%. The board declared a water shortage contingency level 3 in May of 2015, and to achieve a 20% reduction in demand, a prorated 14% increase in the commodity charge was implemented. And just to give you a sense of what the commodity charge is, at that time in 2015, the commodity charge was $2.64, and so it rose to $3.05. The state's target was later reduced to 20%, and when in April 2016, the water shortage level was dropped to a level 2, the drought rates were then reduced to bring about a 10% demand reduction, so the commodity charge fell from $3.05 to $2.92. And this just to show you how the drought rates can be manipulated and adjusted upward or downward as needed. Next slide. In May 2016, the state allowed agencies to self-certify that they had sufficient water supplies. In July, the district self-certified and moved back to a level 1 voluntary water supply shortage. Drought rates were then rescinded, and the commodity charges were returned to the normal levels to $2.64 from the $2.92. Per the drought rates at the time, the district could have increased the commodity rates up to 41.5%, as seen on the table, but instead 14% and later 10% was enough to achieve the desired reduction. The board has previously approved drought rates, most recently in 2019, which is the table on the top of the slide. These are for potential use in 2020 and 2021, so therefore these drought rates have not been used. The drought rates that could be implemented currently if a mandatory reduction was declared by the state are the ones that are shown at the top of the table. The table on the bottom shows the proposed drought rates and reflect the 6 stages not required by the new urban water management plans. The rates on the bottom cannot be implemented without a Prop 218 notice and without the board adopting them at a public hearing. This concludes the staff presentation, and the recommended action is to consider authorizing the general manager to declare a water shortage level 1, along with its accompanying voluntary demand reduction measures. And we are available to answer questions.
Okay, thank you. And I don't see any questions.
I have one question.
Okay, board
Toggle back and forth between the screens.
board member Mosca.
I'm just interested in looking at the
delta is between what is already approved and what's proposed.
So
Up to 10%, so
Yeah.
that's,
So this table, the one that's labeled table 5.4, those are the
Right.
current drought rates that are available to be implemented if we were to go into a mandatory water demand reduction. At the time, we only had 5 levels on the water shortage contingency plan. On the bottom, it shows with the state required agencies to increase their water shortage levels to 6. And so that's why there's more of a spread of the increase that would normally occur if the drought rates needed to be implemented. So you can see with only 5 levels, the drought rates would be percentage increases would be higher than
Right.
under the 6.
Well, hopefully we don't get that high. But,
Hopefully.
but that bottom one is what we bifurcated in the last rate discussion.
Correct.
And at some point, we may get back to that discussion.
Correct.
All right, perfect.
But to be clear, the latest drought rates were adopted in 2019.
Correct.
And we, because we did bifurcate and we decided, it was decided not to pursue another rate study for potential drought rate changes, we will be implementing, if we get into a jam and we need to implement drought rates, we'll be most likely implementing 2019 rates.
We can do until the end of the year because that's where the drought rates are.
Right.
And then after that, when we checked with our attorneys, they said you can, but there might be a risk with implementing those old drought rates.
Well, I think that historically, we've managed to stay away from implementing drought rates, and I hope we can continue that. We do have the rate stabilization fund that I think has been a very useful tool for the ratepayers in the San Diego Water District, so I do expect that to continue. Board Member Lyons.
I was just going to ask, you mentioned there would be a risk to implementing 2019 rates that we've already approved prior. How would you characterize that risk?
Based on what the attorney's information is, there was some kind of a lawsuit at one point in time against Imperial District, and it had to do with utilizing older drought rates when they implemented, I think, in 2016 or so. So that's where we didn't get the full-blown kind of lawyer input, but this in his short email, that's what he mentioned, that there will be a risk if you apply that.
Okay, thank you.
Member Hensy.
Yeah, just a quick comment that I've been very happy to see our presence on Instagram, and I think now that we have the consistent message from the governor that the whole state is in a drought, that will be a really easy message to communicate to the public. And especially using those images like the one that you shared with us, you can really see the effects of the drought, where sometimes in this community we don't really see it. So keep on doing that, it's great, and it's really easy to share that information.
That's great. I'm hoping everybody will join us on Instagram. We're trying to get more likes on what we put on there.
Board Member Mosca.
Yeah, and I'm absolutely willing to chat with County Water Authority to make sure that we're utilizing our public outreach funds to help out San Diego Water District. I know a lot of the districts rely on County Water Authority, and we've really enhanced a lot of our communication tools and skills, and the team is amazing. So however we can help out the district, I'm going to push for that.
I appreciate that.
I also think that it is absolutely prudent to be able to look at both the policy of stabilization along with some level of drought rates. And so I think that it would be prudent on the district's part to queue up that conversation for the new rates. If there's an argument that potentially the old ones are stale at a certain date, I mean, I think that to preserve that policy discussion for this board, I think we should be moving in that direction.
Yes, and then the final point would be that perhaps we should work with our billing vendor to see if there's ways that we can add a message to the statements that we send out. I know I receive them via PDF and email, but perhaps there's a way that we can enhance the literature that we send every 2 months to customers, or put a buck slip in for those that go through the U.S. mail. So outreach is pretty important. So thank you for that and this report. And is that another question from you, Joe?
No, we need a motion for this. I'll move the staff's recommendation to move us to stage 1.
And I'll second.
I think that should we go to stage 1 now, or should we authorize the general manager to make that determination?
The declaration is to move to stage 1, or?
Yeah.
We can do it now.
Yes.
can do it now.
Yeah, the recommended action is discuss this, consider authorizing general managers to declare a water shortage response level 1. But if we're going to do it from the dais tonight, that's fine too, right? Okay, there's a motion. Looks like Board Member Lyons is second, so we can vote now.
Motion carries unanimously with Vice President Blakespear absent.
Okay, very good. We are at 6, so we'll scoot through these remaining items. General Manager update, is there anything critical you need to tell us about?
No, I'm good.
Okay, and with that, we're adjourned. And we will be starting the city council meeting in 5 minutes, so we're going to be a little bit behind schedule, but 6:05 will be the starting time. All right, good evening. Tonight, it will be me calling to order the city council meeting of Wednesday, October 20th.
Moment, so the recording starts.
Oh, I didn't get clearance from the city clerk. First lesson.
Okay, you can start when ready.
Okay. Now I shall call to order the city council meeting of Wednesday, October 20th, 2021, and the time is 6:07. And I would like to ask for the city clerk to call the roll.
Board Member Hinsey,
Here?
Board Member Lyons,
Here?
Councilmember Mosca.
Here?
Oh, sorry, I called you both board member. Council members, Deputy Mayor Crayons,
Here.
and Mayor Blakespear is absent. So the record will show all members are present with the exception of Mayor Blakespear.
Okay, very good. And with that, I'd like to ask you to join me, rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, moving on to special presentations and proclamations. Tonight, we have a presentation by Exodus Recovery Incorporated, and the program director, Megan Patrick Thompson of the North Coast Mobile Crisis Response Team, is here to give us that presentation. It's up to you. That's a good spot.
All right. It's a little odd to have my back, but that's okay, we'll go with it. All right, well, thank you so much for inviting the Mobile Crisis Response Team to come out and do a presentation about our pilot program in the North Coastal region. I'm Dr. Megan Patrick Thompson. I'm the program director for the Mobile Crisis Response Team. And behind me is Alicia Affitardi, who is our program coordinator through Behavioral Health Services. Can you guys hear me? I was like, I do well in a crisis, maybe. There we go. Okay, thank you. Do you want me to take it over? Okay.
There's also a hatch under there. If your presentation gets boring, we drop the.
Oh. Well, I'll try to jazz it up then. Does that work? All right. So I thought tonight what we do, can you hear me better now? Okay, perfect. I thought we'd do is just give a general overview of our services and have an opportunity to ask questions if we have time, and then just let you guys know about our pilot program and how it's going and how we've interfaced with the city of Encinitas already. So like I said, our pilot program launched in January of 2021. So we are out in the 10th month of our program. And although a mobile crisis response team is new to San Diego County, these are the standard of care across the crisis continuum throughout the United States. And really, I think what Behavioral Health Services saw was that there was a gap in our services between the access and crisis line and our psychiatric emergency response team. So our PERT officers that respond with law enforcement. And what we were really seeing is that there was a lot of individuals that were falling through needing behavioral health services and not knowing where to connect those. So really what our whole purpose to do is to go out and respond when there's a psychiatric emergency in the community. And when an individual is not needing that higher level, that PERT and law enforcement intervention, our team goes out and does an assessment to determine what level of care they might need. So next slide. So great. So we currently we're operating from 7 a.m. to midnight, but one of the exciting things about our pilot program is that we're expanding to 24/7. So with our last call out for in-person going to be at 9 and responding till midnight, with the option for telephonic intervention overnight. So our services are clinician-driven with peer-supported crisis intervention, assessment and connection to behavioral health care. Referrals are made through the access and crisis line and screened for safety. And then once that referral is appropriate, it's sent over to MCRT to respond in the field. So who makes up our team? We have 3 individuals. We have a licensed clinician. So that's somebody who might be a psychologist, a licensed clinical social worker, a marriage and family therapist. We have a master's level case manager, who's somebody who is license eligible, who's working towards licensure. And their expertise is kind of connecting people with resources in the community. And then we have a community health worker who's a peer support specialist, who's somebody who has lived experience with behavioral health, either through themselves or through their family. And so what our team does is we collaborate with the citizens of our community, with law enforcement, with hospitals, behavioral health providers. And really what we're trying to do is to assess that client and get them to the right level of care. Some collaboration we've already done in the city of Encinitas is we've gone out to law enforcement at the North Coastal Station, and we've done their briefings, going over like what our services are, how you access them, who's an appropriate referral. We did a ride-along with your HOT team, so your homeless outreach team, to kind of get an idea of some of the barriers they're facing connecting their people to behavioral health services. So really that's the whole point of a mobile crisis response team, is really to identify the needs of the individual we're serving and help break down those barriers to connection to behavioral health services. Because that system can be really complicated, regardless if you're somebody who is receiving Medi-Cal or private insurance. There's a lot of barriers that people have to go through to get those services, and we want to make sure that we get people to the right level of care in a timely fashion. And so our team's there to kind of support that. Next slide. So one of our goals is to really de-escalate the situation in the moment. So our team goes out and they do an assessment. From that assessment, they're trying to come up with a plan of care for that moment. So sometimes that's giving an intervention in the home, stabilizing them and making sure to connect them with outpatient services. Other times we're going out and doing that assessment and seeing that they need to go to another level of care. So we can take people to our crisis stabilization unit. So another exciting thing in the North Coastal region is Exodus Recovery just opened a crisis stabilization unit in Vista that's accessible to the whole North Coastal region. So we do a warm handoff to that system of care. We can do an assessment and take them to a walk-in assessment clinic. So with the CSU, it's now 24 hours a day. Somebody can go in and get a psychiatric evaluation. And it doesn't always mean that they're staying in the crisis stabilization portion of the program. And then I think in December, they're slated to open another one in Oceanside for another crisis stabilization unit, kind of opening up 24 more beds in our community. Other things we do is connect people to residential crisis houses. So if we go out and we're seeing they need a longer time to stabilize, we're making those referrals and those connections. So what we've seen so far in our pilot program is we're diverting calls away from higher levels of care when they're not needed about 93% of the time, which is really excellent work, because what we're trying to do is not bog down our emergency departments with people that maybe don't belong there but belong somewhere else and they just don't know where to go. So our team, when they're making that assessment, they're making the recommendations. Another great aspect about our program is that we're just not a one-time intervention. So when we go out, we have the ability to follow people up to 30 days post our intervention, which is a really great aspect of our program, because a lot of times when people are in crisis and you're trying to give them a lot of information all at once, it's really overwhelming. So we have the ability to make sure that we follow them and they get to where they want to go, and we're helping identify the barriers along the way and breaking down those barriers. So we've seen a lot of great success with that. Also with reconnection, so I think this was something that was unexpected when we launched our pilot, was that, as we know, as people with chronic behavioral health issues get disconnected from their providers for lots of different reasons, homelessness, not having access to getting to their appointments. So what we realized is that we had a lot of work to do to kind of help support those individuals when we go out in the field and see that they're already open to a provider, that we get them reconnected with that provider. So I think what's great about our pilot is we're doing a lot of data right now to try to really understand where the need is and where we can do better and improve our system of care and behavioral health services. I think I can just give you guys one kind of success story that we had within the last week that was really highlighted that need to drill down and identify barriers and what's going on for people to get them the care that they need. So we had an individual that, because of their symptoms, relocated to San Diego, were homeless. They were placed on a 5150. They got into the emergency room again, and then we're at a CSU. Oceanside Police called us a couple hours after being released from a CSU. Our team went out, we did an assessment, and we were really trying to determine what was going on. This individual has been here only 2 weeks and had been in our emergency services 3 times. So what we found is this person actually had a place to go home to. They just didn't know how to get there and didn't have that support. So our team followed them through, made sure they had their medications, made sure they had an airplane ticket back home and a family that was accepting them on the other end. So I think that's the kind of care when we do those follow-up care coordinations, that we're really seeing the success of doing that. To really drill down, like, what is going on with this individual that they're coming in and out of our emergency services, and then trying to prevent going into that, because that's not sometimes treatment or pushing them towards recovery. So that's just an example of one of the many success stories that we found in our pilot. So next slide. So how are referrals made to the mobile crisis response team? So right now they're all coming through the access and crisis line. We are working with our law enforcement partners to hopefully be embedded in with dispatch, so then we can receive referrals directly from law enforcement. And like I said, right now we're in operation from 7 a.m. to midnight, with November 1st being able to expand our services 24 hours a day. Right now we see only adults, but the other exciting part is November 1st is we're opening up the service to children and youth. So we're really breaking down, the barriers of who can access our services and really expanding those times. Because as we know, crisis doesn't happen just during business hours, that there's a lot of stuff that we need to do after those hours and make those connections. Next slide. So who's eligible? So we cover the North Coastal region. So essentially that's the top of Camp Pendleton and down through the city of Del Mar, and includes the city of Vista. So that's our service area, and the North Coastal zip codes are there. Behavioral Health Services is really investing in the mobile crisis response team, and the county is too. And Telecare is expanding to the other regions currently. So they started with South Bay and North Central, and they're working their way up. So eventually, then MCRT team will be available across the region, with us keeping the North Coastal region. So when we think about who's eligible and ineligible, we want to really see about, the eligibility factors. We really want to experience people who are experiencing a behavioral health crisis that doesn't require that law enforcement interaction, that they're having some deterioration in their activities of daily living, and they're unable to access traditional outpatient services. So somebody who needs that face-to-face within 24 hours to have an intervention. So we're kind of seen as more of like an urgent care, but mobile. So. And then who's ineligible? When we're trying to think of ineligibility criteria for MCRT, we really want to think about not to make it so narrow that no one's eligible, but not make it so broad that it compromises staff and client safety. So things that would make someone ineligible, next slide, would be obviously not in our region, if they're an immediate risk to danger to self or others, because we're not an emergency team, we're not 911, and we have a wider geographical area, we wouldn't be able to respond to those calls. Those would be more appropriate for 911. So if there's an active suicide in progress, there's a medical intervention needed, if the individual is presenting as aggressive or violent. And so if somebody is yelling or screaming, that's what behavioral health is trained to do, is to de-escalate those kinds of situations. We're more talking about people that are posturing and threatening people with violence. If they have a history of aggression with providers, or law enforcement, that's somebody that we'd have to screen out. If they have possession of a firearm or weapon, engaging in criminal acts, under the influence of an illicit substance known to impact impulse control. And this one is really gray, and our clinicians use their judgment on it because it's really about their clinical presentation at the time. And perhaps located in an unsafe area and unwilling to relocate. So those are the types of things that we screen for that makes them eligible or ineligible. So next slide. So right now, exciting things are happening in the North Coastal region. I think we're having a lot of behavioral health services coming on board to help with our community. All of our referrals, again, come through the access and crisis line with the hopeful goal of being embedded with dispatch 911. We're 7 a.m. to midnight currently, and then going to be 24 hours a day. Be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I recently had a heartbreaking and kind of shocking conversation with someone who I haven't spoken with in a long time. I called them up. I had a question for them, and I asked them how they were doing, and they said, I've had better days. My son has had another breakdown, and he's left. I can't find him. We're looking for him. We need to get him help. Is that the sort of situation where I should say, well, you should call Exodus and that phone number, the MCRT and that phone number, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, we respond to a lot of families in crisis. I think I didn't mention that. We're really seeing that the families are reaching out to us. Unfortunately, with our services, we have to kind of have a location for the person and be able to answer the safety questions in order to respond to the call. But if they were able to, locate their family member and knew where they were or general region, our team could come out and help out with those situations.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Hensing.
Thank you. I want to thank you so much for being here tonight and just let you know how excited we are about this program and this option. And I think, as Deputy Mayor Krantz said, one of the most heartbreaking parts about this role is that you hear these stories of tragedy where it's a youth, somebody who's never had a psychotic break before, and then their first interaction is with law enforcement. And it's not law enforcement's fault, but that's a very scary and traumatic experience.
Yeah.
So the fact that you exist, to me, represents a big leap in progress. And I'm so glad because tonight we have cannabis on the agenda and we have a lot of youth advocates here. And so it's great that they're receiving this information and able to see that this option is available. MCRTs are a big topic of conversation within our equity committee. And so we're curious to know how we can best support this program in Encinitas, if it's creating a promotional campaign for local outlets here, if it's sharing resources through social media with different groups that support the mission as well. I hope that you let us know.
Yeah.
And then that aspect of the dispatcher training seems to be really critical, that we get that right and that we're doing extensive training and collaboration with the different first responders and law enforcement agents that we have serving our city. So if you have any recommendations on how Encinitas can best support that, I would love to hear. And just the promotional aspect. Is there a fund that the county's put forward to help get the word out, or is that something that we would be best suited to support?
Yeah, so there is going to be a media campaign coming out about MCRT to notify our community. I think there's a lot of levels, right? So people sometimes don't know that we have an access and crisis line here in San Diego and what they do and the services that they provide. So I think there's multi-layers, right? We need to know that there's an access and crisis line that can make the referrals. We need to know that MCRT is in our community. We do a lot of outreach. We go, to a lot of the outpatient clinics, the libraries, and trying to build those relationships. But I think any, information on social media is always helpful. Alicia, I don't know when the media campaign is starting.
Yeah, our media campaign is slated to start.
Oh.
Our media campaign is slated to start hopefully in November to help get that message out there through several different media platforms. But I think, we want to get the message out there as broad and wide as we can, so we're absolutely open to suggestions too. And I think, like Megan said, social media is a great outlet, so we appreciate that.
Thank you, and don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have suggestions about how we can better support your program in our city.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yes, and I very much appreciate the county getting engaged, and I have seen they took some action today at the board to deal with homelessness and other social services that are sorely needed, so I appreciate that. I know this is a pilot program. My hope is that we can someday get to the point where we've got a 611 or whatever the number is, so that we don't have to know what the 888 number is, so that, and it goes to a dispatcher, and we don't have to worry about what part of the region they're in, and the wheels start turning, and if somebody's missing, the sheriffs are notified to be on the lookout for them. And, I'm assuming we're not reinventing the wheel, and that other regions in our country have something similar. So I hope we can use best practices that we can pick up from that. I very much appreciate you being here tonight to describe this to us. And I hope that three of you can handle the work, because it seems like, from what I've seen on the street anecdotally, it might need more man or woman power. So thank you again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Okay. With that, we move into oral communications. And Kathy, how many do we have
Yes,
tonight?
we have 5.
Okay, thank you. And this is a comment on items that are not on the agenda. And, we appreciate you being here to make these comments. We are unable to engage on the issues that you raised today, but there may be staff direction that comes from it, so.
Great, so I'll call you 3 at a time. First is Nancy Logan, followed by Tyler McCormick, and then Mark Wilcox.
Good evening, Council. Nice to see you all in person, and I love the new decor. This is amazing. So compliments to whoever did that. We used to, San Diego Alliance, as you know, trains all the schools in Red Ribbon Weeks, and we used to come in every year and get a proclamation for, we'd have a lot of students in here, but we don't do that anymore, so I thought I would update you on the Red Ribbon Week that we're doing. So we have trained every elementary school, middle school, and high school in the entire region for Red Ribbon Week. And they're all on board doing it. We trained them virtually, and if you drive by any of the elementary schools, you'll see red ribbons everywhere. They all have lots of activities, and it's just so heartwarming to see that they're still doing this. And I particularly wanted to bring your attention to La Costa Canyon High School. I've been meeting with them in their PALS class, which is Peer Assistance Leadership Services. And these students and their teacher and my assistants, they have the most amazing week planned for next week. It's just what they're doing. Literally, I was telling my colleagues today, it almost makes me cry what they're doing. This is a list of what they're doing every single day next week. And where it says the crash car, that is an actual crash car from a DUI. And it has a board with it stating everything that happened. Unfortunately, there's always a death. And that car will be in the middle of campus at La Costa Canyon all next week. And then on Friday night, the 29th, La Costa Canyon plays Torrey Pines, which is the highest attended game of the entire year, and they are moving that car to right in front of the gym where every single spectator will see when they buy their tickets. So they're just, raising awareness on them. I love the theme. They thought of this, together we can survive. So I just wanted to bring your attention to what we're doing. And also what we're doing now that the world's opening up a little bit, a lot of special events are happening, I'm sure you all know, here in Encinitas. So in order for the events to comply with the Encinitas code, they need the special event training to serve alcohol. So we've been at every one of those each weekend. Sometimes I'm training 3 and 4 a day at all the special events so that the servers know the rules and how to serve the alcohol and how much they can serve and who not to serve to, and make sure you serve, they have to be over 21. So it's all good. So I just wanted to let you know what we're up to.
Thank you, Nancy. I appreciate all the work that you and the Alliance do to educate the community and especially the youth.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Tyler McCormick, and I go to LCC, which is La Costa Canyon High School. I volunteered in the Study Buddy program sponsored by San Diego Alliance. Study Buddies is an after-school program that pairs elementary school students with high school students who help them with their homework and act as mentors. Study Buddy participants make a pledge to be alcohol, tobacco, and drug-free. I would like to thank the city for its leadership in banning the sale of flavored tobacco products. Surveys show that 93% of youth who try vaping begin with a flavored product, and according to the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids, youth who vape nicotine are 3.5 times more likely to vape marijuana. With the flavored tobacco ban, you acknowledge that flavored products hook kids. I hope that you will recognize that flavored marijuana products do the same thing. Candy flavors are used to increase the appeal of high-potency vapes while also making them seem less dangerous. These products are marketed through social media, and it's not a surprise that tobacco companies like Altria are investing billions of dollars in the marijuana industry. Adding flavored marijuana products to the city's ban would be a win for public health and safety. Thank you for your time.
Following Mark will be Judy Strang.
Good morning, good evening, Mayor and City Councilor, Mayor's office, I guess. Nice to see an engaged young man, well-spoken like that, that's involved. I am Mark Wilcox, a father, grandfather, and San Diego Union High School district parent. I noticed that agenda item 10B is about establishing cannabis business registration, application, and other regulatory fees, and a report regarding public outreach, odor management, procedures for filing complaints, signage, and other topics. This update seems ironic since it includes public outreach, yet there have not been any of the recommended workshops held for citizens. There seems to be a recurring refrain that people feel they are being left out of the conversation on key issues. The most recent example was the relocation of the safe parking lot to the City Recreation Center near Oak Crest Middle School. Parents wondered why no one thought to notify the school board or the parents of Oak Crest students earlier in the process. Certainly they should have the right to weigh in on this important decision. Now there's a similar concern about the city's approach to implementing Measure H, the industry-backed initiative that will bring marijuana storefronts, manufacturing facilities, and marijuana farms to Encinitas. There are many decisions to be made about the vetting applicants, notifying neighbors when a marijuana business location is proposed, the process for filing complaints, such as odor complaints, and what remediation will take place. If ever a workshop was necessary, it would be to decipher the 30-page staff report for item 10B, which creates far more questions than it answers. It is paramount that the public opinion is considered a valuable part of this process and not simply just an afterthought. Thank you.
Good evening, Judy Strang, Executive Director of San Diego Alliance for Drug-Free Youth. It's a pleasure to be here. And I also wanted to share with you a little bit more about what's been going on with San Diego Alliance. It happens to be Substance Abuse Month and, of course, Red Ribbon Week. And we've always in the past brought something to express our regard for you, and I'll leave this with Kathy, and she can distribute it later as a kind of a very small token of how much we recognize the decision-making you do is in our public health and welfare, our needs and concerns. I did want you to know that as a county prevention provider, we have attended Megan's presentation. What we have found in the drug prevention world is that we are on tangential courses to mental health concerns. And I identify strongly with Tony's question because I've been on the other side of that very same phone conversation, both in my family and in my circle of acquaintance and professionally. And we at San Diego Alliance wanted to be prepared for our families that have these same situations. We wanted you to know that yesterday we attended the Board of Supervisors to support Supervisor Desmond's item 2, which was to bring fentanyl education into our high school so that we could have our young people know sooner than what they seem to about the problems there. I mention that because this is the outgrowth of a countywide group called the Prescription Drug Abuse Task Force. It's been in existence about 15 years now. It originated with Supervisor Pam Slater-Price, but what you probably didn't know is that San Diego Alliance was one of the founders of that group, and that was because our parents had discovered, and I searched for it and found it, out in our neighborhoods, our parents did, the first signs that we indeed had an opioid epidemic with our young people. And we were finding all over our neighborhoods pieces of foil that had black tracking on it. This turned out to be OxyContin that our young people were putting a lighter underneath and melting and then inhaling. OxyContin has since been reformulated. Took several years to make that happen, but it is. But I wanted you to know that we've long been aware that we have an opioid crisis in our community. I'd like to think that we were on the forefront of bringing that to the public's attention, and that's been 15 years that's been going on. We are concerned that we see another epidemic in the making, and it's both a drug as well as a mental health epidemic, and that has to do with the use of marijuana by our young people and its high concentration that is precipitating mental health crisis for our young people. And of course, I'm here to address item 10B, but I wanted you to understand that we receive the input from parents. And I guess I'll say thank you for this opportunity and just leave this with Kathy. And we do appreciate all that you do on our behalf.
Thank you.
And Mayor, that does conclude public speakers.
And I would ask the city manager, at some point, we might have an update on the opioid lawsuit that the city is participating in. I know there's been a lot of news lately about Purdue Pharma attempting to settle in ways that seem a little disconcerting, but an update would be useful. Thank you. Okay, today we had no closed session, so are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Mayor, item 11A, which is the Pacific View update, has been removed from the agenda by staff and will be placed on a future agenda. And then moving to the consent calendar, item 8D has been removed by a member of the public.
Okay, so anybody here for Pacific View, that's not going to be held tonight. And then meanwhile, that means we have 8A, 8B, 8C, 8E, 8F, 8G, 8H, 8I, and 8J. And I would like to comment on the one item having to do with public art. It's always very exciting when we have the opportunity to engage an artist in making our public space a little bit nicer to look at. And I especially appreciate Kevin Anderson, a longtime local and a former student of my father's, who is really doing a great job of beautifying the region. So I appreciate the efforts that the Arts Commission made on that one. So I would entertain a motion.
I'll move approval of the balance of the consent calendar, and I'll also add that I'm excited about a couple other items on there, which include that our bike classes that we're having at the community center in partnership with the San Diego Bike Coalition are so popular and so well attended that we're extending those. And I'm also very excited about the Beacons Bluff rehab project, which will include a certain amount of funds for beach ambassadors to take part in the restoration of that project. So
I'll second that motion and agree with both my colleagues on those points made. And then I'd also just want to comment on 8J and just thank our engineering staff for getting that speed limit at 25 miles per hour. That is so critically important. I think it's going to be, it's going to prove to be really safe for a lot of the families that use that park in the area. And so thank you to the staff. I know that it was kind of a roundabout way of getting there, but we're there. And now it's 25 miles per hour, and it's really safe, so thank you.
Did you say roundabouts? Yes.
I think the direction, the pathway was a roundabout,
Well,
but
and
we're here.
Okay, we can vote now. But I also would like to have staff bring back, if you would, please, Ms. City Manager, a briefing on the new legislation that allows the city more latitude in establishing speed limits, because I firmly believe we should be a slow-speed city.
And the motion carries unanimously with Mayor Blakespear absent. Takes us to item 8D.
Okay.
And our speaker is Ron Larson. Ron, would you like a staff report, or did you just want to make comments? Okay, come on up.
This is about the beach run, correct? I just wanted to say my wife and I think it's a great idea. I'd like to see it pass. That's it. I wanted to come down here and say that. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay,
I'll move 8D.
And I'll second.
thank you.
Motion carries unanimously with Mayor Blakespear absent.
Okay, thank you. That takes us to our action items, beginning with item 10A, which is a public hearing to consider an appeal of the Planning Commission's denial of a design review permit and coastal development permit to allow for the demolition of an existing unit and the reconstruction of a new unit and associated improvements to an existing 5-unit complex. And the appellants are Randy and Tony Popian. And we're going to have a presentation first from Todd Moreau. And just kind of FYI, we will then, once we have the staff report, we're going to ask the city council to disclose any other information they've received that is not included in the staff report. We'll have a round of preliminary questions after that. Then the public hearing will be opened, and the applicant/appellant will be able to speak for 10 minutes. Then there will be public speakers, if there are any, and then the applicant/appellant will have 5 minutes for rebuttal. And then we'll close the public hearing and the council discussion will ensue. Thank you, Todd.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Krantz. As he indicated, this is a public hearing to consider an appeal of the Planning Commission's denial of a design review permit and a coastal development permit located at 122 through 128 Hermes Avenue, which basically allowed for the demolition of one unit on the property and then the reconstruction of that unit and then associated improvements to basically a 5-unit complex. And the appellant is Tony and Randy Popian. And the project is located here, as you can see, essentially a 5-unit complex on Hermes. Is a legal nonconforming unit, essentially here in the front, that was constructed in 1929. Various changes occurred to the rear units here between kind of the years of 1935 and 1950, respectively. And it's kind of the gist of the conversation here is the legal nonconforming unit section of the municipal code, section 3076.120B1, which states nonconforming residential buildings of 5 or more units may be modified if the resulting profile does not result in a structure contrary to the section, and the following findings are made by the authorized agency. And so the first one is that there's no additional negative impacts to the character of the neighborhood beyond the assumed negative impacts of the nonconformity. And then the second one is the resulting design will enhance the neighborhood, will not significantly increase the economic life of the nonconformity beyond that which would occur through normal maintenance practices, and that the building profile modification is necessary for a protection of health and safety. And so just the context, looking at the neighborhood, you can see there's a lot of different multifamily project sites directly across the street, to the south, and then to the west. So essentially, Hermes itself is zoned R8, which is a single-family residential zone. And then further west is a mixed-use zone within the 101 specific plan. And just, once again, this kind of just shows the context of the project site, the unit here in the front. 2-story structures do exist here in the neighborhood. There is a 2-story flat roof structure adjacent to the south, as well as further north on the same side of the street. And then you can kind of see through the profile here with some 2-story structures there fronting Vulcan.
And real quick, the county, when the zoning did allow for multifamily housing by right, correct? They were, so it's not like these are necessarily bootleg units. These are all were built under county permitted projects?
Correct, yeah, so they're legal, non-conforming under that year and time. And so just capturing kind of what the Planning Commission essentially reviewed was essentially a design review permit and a coastal permit. And it's basically rehabbing or demolishing the unit here in front and constructing a new unit. And then basically repainting a kind of a slight reface to these, but mostly just cosmetic. Changing the color scheme to kind of match the concept of the front. And basically there was a new site planning, so there's some new parking improvements, the driveway being widened to meet fire requirements, trash enclosures being upgraded to the site, slight grading, and then just landscaping and retaining walls that were decorative, but pretty significant landscaping in the front that's being added and then enhanced kind of throughout the site. But overall, that is kind of the project scope to the 5 units that exist there. And this is just the concept of what was proposed. So this is as seen from the front. So this is seen from Hermes itself, the proposed new building. And then this is the south elevation. And this is as seen south in context to the existing units to the rear that essentially were being repainted or kind of to match the similar context of the front with keeping it different overall to meet the design guidelines. And then this would be the west elevation of the new building, and then the north as seen from that private drive with the new trash enclosure, and then the context of the duplex units, or attached units, I should say, in the back. Materials, side cladding, stucco. There's 2 different types of stucco, and then black trim around the windows. You can kind of see the landscape concept with various walls there. And so basically the appeal was filed timely, and it's kind of 3 main points to the appeal. Essentially, the first one was the Planning Commission interpretation of the non-conforming regulations for multifamily projects of 5 or more units. It's kind of 2 different categories. We have a 5 or more, or kind of a 4 or less. So it was that interpretation. And then the second point was how the project reduces the structural nonconformity and does not significantly increase the economic life of that nonconformity on site. And then the third was just kind of a general point related to the new unit meeting the design review guidelines related to the project. And so related to the first point, the Planning Commission denied the application based on the finding for legal nonconforming units of 5 or more under Municipal Code Section 3076 120B1, and found that the unit being demolished and built back larger in the front of the property created a negative impact to the character of the neighborhood. So that was essentially the discussion that they had. And the appellants contesting that the use nonconformity will remain and not be intensified. There will still be 5 units once completion of the project. In addition, the project is moving the front unit back to comply with the 25-foot front yard setback of the R8 zone. The current 1-story unit is actually 21 feet from the property line, so actually is in the setback. So they're going to demo it and move it back to comply with that requirement. Additionally, there are many 2-story multifamily structures up and down the street and in the general neighborhood. General maintenance and facade changes are being proposed to the back 4 units, including repaint and better match the front unit's concept, and the design will help maintain the existing character. And staff concurs with the applicant's point. The project site contains 2 nonconformities, basically a structural nonconformity. There's an existing 21-foot setback as indicated. And then there's a use nonconformity, basically 5 units on one property site that typically would be zoned for single-family residential. The existing front unit located at 122 Hermes, which is this one here, sits within the front yard setback. The new building as designed will comply with all current setbacks outlined in the R8 zone. including moving the building back to meet the 25-foot required setback and the ultimate property line. The building's design will have no negative impacts to the character of the neighborhood beyond the assumed impacts of the nonconformity. The project is proposing to eliminate the structural nonconformity by demolishing the front unit and reconstructing a new unit that meets the required setbacks. In addition, the project is consistent with the general plan and municipal code. The community character is maintained while allowing creativity in architectural design and site improvements. The project is also conditioned to provide road improvements, as you can kind of see here along the frontage, that wouldn't otherwise be required with just a basic remodel to call it the front unit. And then the second point, the Planning Commission denied the application based on the second finding for illegal nonconforming units of 5 or more, and found that the proposed new structure in the front of the property will increase the economic life of the overall project beyond that which would occur through normal maintenance practices, and that which would be necessary for the protection of health and safety. And the appellant contests that the Planning Commission focused on the term significant increase the economic life without weighing the factors of that which would occur through normal maintenance practices. The appellant contends that replacement of the unit in the front is significantly increasing the economic life of the nonconformity. Their argument points out that the replacement unit is 1 in 5 or 20% of the overall site's economic distribution, and therefore is not exceeding the significant threshold. Additionally, the appellant's opinion is the commission failed to define economic life of a structure and how to analyze it. The commission assumes that rebuilding an existing unit would significantly increase the economic life without weighing the other factors of the project improvements and the elimination of the other setback nonconformities or project enhancements. And staff concurs with the applicant's second point. The economic life of the use nonconformity, so the 5 units, is not being increased as the bulk of the requested change is 1 of the 5 units, which is not considered significant to the overall project site. The use nonconformity will remain and not be intensified as 5 units will still remain. The new project will comply with development standards in the underlying zone, and the project is consistent with the general plan and municipal code. And then the third point dealt with the design review. And so the Planning Commission felt the project did not meet some of the design review guidelines, mainly related to the front unit itself being proposed. And the appellant contests that the balance of the commission focus was on a narrow view as it relates to the design review guidelines for portions of the front building and not the overall site enhancements and overall site perspective as it relates to the majority of the design review guidelines that the project does comply with. And staff recommends staff does concur with that it does meet the findings, that they did propose a well-designed project that relates well to the surrounding community. Staff found that the applicant had provided a creative development solution through its architecture, landscape, and site planning. The visual changes that would be associated with the proposed project contribute to the overall eclectic aesthetic of the surrounding community while maintaining a sufficient landscape buffer within the project site and to the adjacent properties fronting the proposed community. Staff found that the front building and painting upgrades to the rear units met the design review guidelines. The new building as designed will comply with all current setbacks outlined in the R8 zone, including the 25-foot required front setback. The building design will have no additional negative impacts to the character of the neighborhood beyond the assumed impacts of the nonconformity that already exist today. And so with that, staff is recommending the City Council set aside the decision of the Planning Commission and approve the appeal, thus adopting Resolution 2021-102 with the findings to approve case number multi 3486 2019, and the conditions that are contained within that. And we're available here for questions, as well as I believe the appellant is as well.
Okay, thank you, Todd. With that, we will have any disclosures, starting with Councilmember Hensy.
I have nothing to disclose.
Excuse me, I have nothing to disclose.
Same, nothing to disclose.
I did go by and take a look at the site today, and other than that, nothing else to disclose. So with that, we move on to any preliminary questions the council may have for staff.
Oh, sorry.
And Councilmember Mosca.
Actually, Councilmember Hensy had her. She was in the queue. She beat me.
Thank you. So I'm interested in understanding better what our code is trying to incentivize with this nonconformity and the restriction on not extending the economic life of multifamily in a neighborhood that's meant to be single family. So is that what it's meant to do in this case? Is that if you have a multifamily unit like this that was built prior to incorporation, that our code is encouraging the applicant to build a single family in its place?
Thank you, Councilwoman Hensy. The way the code is written, as Todd mentioned in his PowerPoint, is there's a distinction made between nonconformity provisions that apply to 1 to 4 units versus 5 or more, which are typically multifamily, even though 2 or more is multifamily. One could interpret that, yes, that is the intent, is to eliminate, to the extent feasible, all nonconformities. Given in this, we looked at this site, we looked at its adjacency to other multifamily. Also, given the need for housing in our community, I think there is an interpretation that could be made that it's important to incentivize the retention of multifamily. And given the strict interpretation of the findings, that we believe that a conversion or a reconstruction of 1 unit out of 5 wouldn't be rise to the threshold of significance, which is why we were recommending approval of the project as proposed.
And will you remind me what the percentage that would be a significant trigger would be?
There is no specific threshold per se, but given that they're replacing 1 or reconstructing 1 out of 5 units, that's 20%. We believe that it didn't rise to that threshold, but that's our professional recommendation. But given the elimination of the other nonconformity, so through this process, they're also eliminating the structural nonconformity, bringing the site into more conformance, thereby only the use nonconformity would remain. Currently, we have 2, but as a result of this project, would result in just 1 existing nonconformity remaining.
Okay, so if this was if this was 4 and under, and it was going through the planning process, and they are going to resolve the nonconformity, which is the setback, then it wouldn't have triggered this discretionary review.
Yes, it would be a different finding. Anything, if it's 4 or less, then they could replace all 4 units and reconstruct all 4 units as long as they're not increasing the nonconformity. They meet all the other standards, but they could, the homeowner or property owner can replace all 4 units.
And could they also combine 4 units into 1 unit without triggering discretionary review?
So any elimination of units will trigger a coastal permit. That would be the only discretionary permit that would be triggered if they were to combine or reduce the number of units down to 1.
So it wouldn't come to our planning commission and thus our city council?
That's correct.
Thank you.
So these are great questions, and it really answers a lot of what I was kind of thinking about. But I just want to go down kind of a rabbit hole just a little bit, and it's kind of an aside from this. But so I remember when we were talking about the legal non-conforming use of a drive-through on ECR in El Camino Real, And there's still, at least in this council member, a desire to not have the drive-throughs on ECR and other parts of our city. But it's a non-conforming use, and it's something that we don't want to continue. And so I guess one approach could be that, if you wanted to continue that, you could interpret the code in a certain way to allow it to continue, or we could have a policy discussion. So are we going to have a policy discussion at some point about different uses that maybe something that was, prohibited, like, maybe there's a new theory down the line as to why we want drive-throughs in the future. They're not, maybe the cars aren't emitting as much greenhouse gases in the future and stuff. So just how do you, my rabbit hole is, how do you approach that so that we actually have a policy that encourages that which we want?
If I could respond in terms of they're somewhat apples and oranges in terms of this situation here, considering that there are strict specific findings that pertains to this particular type of nonconformity. Regarding the drive-through, the issue with the drive-through is the fact that under the county, no use permit was required as permitted by right. Now, under the city code, it triggers a use permit. So it's a nonconformity in the sense that it's an existing use that could continue to operate, but any modifications, whether it's an expansion of the drive-through, would trigger the use permit. So it's not that the nonconformity is being continued, is that there is a process that is available to allow the drive-through to continue. There are other areas in the city where drive-throughs are outright prohibited. There is a case that is coming before the Planning Commission at the next meeting or two, in which that issue will be discussed in terms of areas in the city where drive-throughs are outright prohibited. And if there is an existing drive-through use, what are the criteria to establish or to determine whether a use is being extended or expanded? So
Yes.
that item will be before the planning.
Yeah, so let's pull this back out of the rabbit hole and kind of get back onto this. That drive-through is a little bit off.
My
the
initial
beaten
questions
path.
are done.
Thank you.
Okay,
I was just curious.
thank you. I have no preliminary questions, so with that, we will open the public hearing and hear from the applicant appellant or their representative.
I need to crank this up a bit. Hang on. I just want to make sure you hear me. All right, perfect. My name is Ken Ellefson. I'm with Lars Remodeling and Design, representing the applicant appellant. When we set out on this journey nearly 3 years ago, certainly the intent of our project was very straightforward. They're looking forward to retiring soon. They have this property. It has 5 units on it. They would like to retire into the front unit. The current unit is not sufficient for their lifestyle and for their ongoing needs as aging in place. We went through this process with them to create a home that would be suitable for their retirement, recognizing that is a legal nonconformity in place, or a couple of them, and doing our best to reduce those nonconformities, taking care of the front yard setback, certainly trying to improve the neighborhood at the same time, right? Trash enclosures, you said you went by the site today. You may have seen the trash enclosure right there at the street, kind of unsightly. We're trying to address those things, right? We're trying to widen the driveway, take care of drainage, improve the area at the street to give that front of the yard back to the street. And certainly we're not looking to increase the usage on the property. that one unit that is older and not suitable for their life. We wanted to replace, but there's 5 units on the property now. There'd be 5 units when we're done. And certainly, we'd be bringing the homeowner to the property. It would no longer be a rental, which is actually what it is used now. But moving forward, she would live in the neighborhood and be able to look after the neighborhood and take care of the neighborhood. And if we're talking about enhancing the neighborhood, certainly that has to be a consideration. When we looked at the neighborhood, the style of the project, certainly we didn't feel like we were trying to reinvent the wheel, as you suggested earlier, Deputy Mayor. This is one of 10 multifamily projects on the same street. 10. And I know that there's the 2 categories, 4 and under, 5 and above. This is one of 4 that fit that elevated category. This is not a loan. We're not trying to do something that's unorthodox or unheard of in this neighborhood. We're simply trying to remain consistent with what is there. The character of the neighborhood is certainly very diverse as it stands now. We're not trying to introduce an architectural style that doesn't exist. There are several contemporary or modern projects within one block. There are 7, actually, 7 modern or contemporary structures within one block. There are some traditional projects, some that are maybe more eclectic, and we feel like our project fits right in with the character of the neighborhood. We don't want to do anything to bring down the character of the neighborhood. We certainly want to enhance the neighborhood as we bring this project forward. And so our contention certainly is that we are not enhancing, we are enhancing the neighborhood, but not significantly increasing the economic life of the nonconformity. We aren't introducing any additional negative impacts to the character of the neighborhood. And certainly we feel like this would be just the opposite, an enhancement. And we're doing everything that we can do to reduce those nonconformities that exist while providing for our client. That's all I have. And this is Tony Popian, the client.
Hi, I'm not quite as tall as he is. So, my name's Tony Popian. My family bought this property in 1988. I know it's a 5-plex to you. To us, it was a home that was, they told us they couldn't tell us the date it was built. It was added on to in the 1930s, and 4 units had been completed in 1988. They started in 1987 before. They were all maintained as rentals. It's been my lifelong dream to move to that property. I've worked in pediatric healthcare and had to be on call and not had the opportunity to do that. I started it 3 years ago because I retire in December, and I would be able to locate to this location. I'm asking the Encinitas City Council to review and approve the project for 1222 Hermes. We're not in the developing business. It has always been our intent and our ongoing intent to improve and live in this property, moving it from a rental to an owner-occupied retirement home. And we looked at a lot of upgrades from the fact that, we wanted to do things that were good for the environment. We wanted to move cars off the street. We thought the garages in front weren't friendly. We put them behind on the side of the property to match the units behind and to really, create that welcoming. So open to any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. And it looks like you got 4 minutes left, but you're going to yield the time and we go on to the oral public comments.
Which we have none.
We have none. We have no bananas today. So, Councilmember Hinsey, is that you from now or yes?
Yes. So I'm glad this item is before us. I'm sorry that you've had to go through this process. It bothers me that our city disincentivizes gentle density like this, because I'm of the generation where this is our community character, having multifamily in Leucadia, along Vulcan, where I live near Moonlight Beach. It's so important that we retain that and we incentivize an easier process for families like the Papians who are here tonight to be able to have an easier path to do so. We've disincentivized the maintenance of gentle density by requiring them to have to pay this $300 appeal fee, sending them to the Planning Commission, having to trigger discretionary review, which creates more time, more money, more effort on the parts of our applicants. And so it's my opinion that to reach our housing goals, preserve our community character, and make sure that we can provide for a diversity of housing options in our city, we should hold up the appeal, deny Planning Commission's recommendation to us, and then go further and have a policy discussion about how we can revise our existing code so that we can incentivize families like this to be able to maintain their gentle density. So it seems pretty straightforward to me. It's hard for me to understand why Planning Commission chose to deny this project. It looks fairly beautiful. It looks like a place that will provide important housing for our community. So I would turn that into a motion.
Okay, can I do some housekeeping first? I was a little thrown off by having no public speakers. Therefore, there was no need for rebuttal. And at this time, I need to close the public hearing. And Councilmember Hinsey has just made a motion to uphold the appeal. And if there is a second.
I'll go ahead and second that.
Okay, and you can go ahead and speak.
All right, thank you. I'll just add to what Councilmember Hinsey said, but with a different lens, in that I deal a lot with historic properties, and I also design in ways that are more modern and more contemporary. So I kind of understand sometimes when you go from a 1929 house to a 2021 house, visually, there's going to be different. But that doesn't mean that this is not the right direction to go with this construction. I pay attention to development standards. I'm paying attention to the betterment of the property as far as the non-conforming uses. And I think those are all really good things. And I think this will be an asset to the property and also to the community. I look at context a lot too, and I think there's a lot of variation in this neighborhood, but I don't find that this property is out of context visually. There's enough other uses that are not only uses, but architectural styles that are in the same area. So I just wanted to add on to that as far as my lens on the project.
Yes, thank you. And I had to check the map of conflicts because I live in the neighborhood, and there have been some remarkable projects that have been constructed in the neighborhood to upgrade it significantly, and I think this will indeed do that. I did not notice the trash enclosure when I went by there today, but I did notice that the electrical service is overhead, and it's my hope that it will be undergrounded because I hate wires, and it would be nice to be able to underground the power on each of the streets in the neighborhood, but that's a whole different discussion, and I don't want to go down the rabbit hole like my colleague did. Councilmember Mosca.
Yeah, simple and brief. I think it's fairly easy to make the findings for both the permits of the design review and the CDP. So I'll agree with my colleagues, and I also agree with Councilmember Kelly Sheehan that I'd love to have this policy come back where we can kind of look at more ways of making this more straightforward, that we would be incentivizing and encouraging these type of developments.
Well, I think it's probably due to come back in part because of the passage and signature of the governor on SB 9. This is likely to impact the neighborhood that I live in. So I think that will give us an excellent opportunity to have an extensive discussion on the issues related to multifamily housing. And with that, Madam Clerk, we would like to vote.
If I may Mr. Chairman or Deputy Mayor,
Yes, sir.
I just want to clarify that we did present a draft resolution. I just want to clarify that the motion is to uphold the appeal and to adopt the resolution that was presented to you with conditions of approval.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, I agree.
Motion unanimous. Motion carries unanimously with Mayor Blakespear absent.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate you being here. It is always a heck of a lot easier to consider appeal when there's nobody here to speak against it. So, one of the hardest jobs, parts of this job. So, this one was easy, and I'm sorry you had to go through it, but meanwhile, best of luck with the construction. Okay, on to item 10B, which is to establish cannabis business registration application and other regulatory fees related to the implementation of the voter-approved ordinance 2020-18, Measure H, regulating commercial cannabis activity.
Yes, Deputy Mayor, I'll kick this off over here to your left. I know it's kind of hard with the mask on for staff, if I may. Tonight's action item is to consider and vote on regulatory fees related to the implementation of Measure H, known as Ordinance 2020-18. You'll also receive an update on some questions that were posed to staff and legal at the last council meeting, or not the last one, but the last one on this topic. And those questions were addressed in the agenda report and the attachments. I want to point out that under the election code, no ordinance that is proposed by initiative can be changed except other than to clarify. So we can't add to, subtract from, or otherwise modify this ordinance. A regulation of cannabis is also at the state level, as we pointed out in our documents with the agenda report. The courts have held that a legislative act improperly amends a voter-approved enactment when changes of the scope or effect adds to or takes away something that is designed to change it by adding or take away from the actual provisions. So we're very limited in this aspect. Therefore, to the extent that Measure H does not expressly allow the city to further regulate cannabis businesses or industrial hemp, the city's implementation may clarify but cannot amend the provisions of Measure H. I will now turn this over to staff.
All right, good evening, Jennifer Gates, Planning Manager. I'm going to go ahead and first introduce HDL, and then Evan will be presenting on the fees. So there has been some questions from HDL, so we've asked them to come in and introduce themselves as well as the company. So we have David McPherson and AJ Kaluri with HDL here tonight, and we will have a presentation.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor and City Council. Staff has asked us kind of just talk about us a little bit before the introduction, since there were some questions or concerns that have been brought up in the past regarding our role, but also a little bit about us. So I wanted to share with you, the next slide, a little bit about us and who we are, and also because of our role and our experience associated with dealing with the cannabis-related areas. A little back me, I am the compliance director for HDL. I'm also, from a past experience, a former administrator for the city of Oakland, and the first person in the country to tax and regulate the industry when there was no industry. So doing this for 10 years brings a little different perspective when there was nothing to look at before even Prop 64. And as part of that, in that role, moving over to HDL and be part of their team, HDL has been around for 30 years, serving cities and counties, providing services associated with providing audits, fiscal analysis, operations, revenue, economic development, and software solutions to public agencies during that time, where we have fostered and built great relationships with our clients during that period of time, including the city as well. In that time, in the last 7 years of being part in the role as a compliance director, we have work with over 200 cities and counties. That's almost 80% of all the cities that actually have some kind of compliance program or managed cannabis management program in the state. And during that time, has worked with them and obviously learned a lot from both perspectives of that. HDL is the only private company that has access to all the confidential sales tax data of businesses in California, and specifically to cannabis businesses. We've been monitoring data even before cannabis as an industry ever existed, when they were co-op and collectors throughout the state because of the sales tax data. So we've seen a lot of different changes in trends or what happening across the state, and specifically in the San Diego County area as well. So when we provide data, it's accurate because it's real data. It's not making assumptions on things, which has been a comment made at some times. HCL also is trusted by law enforcement agencies, state agencies, and the League of Cities. We have worked with legislators during that period of time and fostered great relationships with them as part of that. And 90% of all cities, as I mentioned, that use contracts of cannabis services is through HDL for the most part. During that time, we have drafted over 60 regulatory ordinances, 84 of the 121 cannabis tax measures, developed 35 development agreements in behalf of our client cities and counties as part of that role. Next. These are the services that we provide, not that we necessarily wanted to at the time, but more or less these services exist because clients lack resources and expertise, and that's what we bring to the table in doing that. When I started this 7 years ago as a one-man office, today we have 18 full-time staff at HDL dedicated to helping our local clients to anything addressing cannabis services so that they have the expertise associated with that. Next. We are impartial analysis. There are concerns regarding our role, but that's the role we play. The outcome of whatever the city and the policy makers like you do is what we are in the best interest of you when you do something or don't do something. Not that we have any incentive to that. We're here for you. Implementing a citizen initiative is part of that, where that decision is made, where you need impartial analysis. So we work closely with your staff. We have no cannabis business sector clients. We have no public sector clients at all. In fact, most of our staff are asked to fill out 700 forms, no different than you do on confidentiality or financial interest. We clearly say in our contracts we have no conflict of interest. We provide you a letter regarding concerns of that at one point, and we continue to hold that integrity throughout the state with our role with our clients and are well trusted by them. We defer to City Council and staff on all final decisions. Although we provide recommendations, we typically will give you options and give you alternatives and scenarios that the outcome of that with our experience of doing that so that you can make a good informed decision and that decision relies on you as that final decision. We focus on best practices. We've learned a lot and we've grown a lot, not only as a company working with cannabis businesses, but because of our experience that we have, it is uniquely that we can do that and grow where others are, even our competitors, because they don't play the roles that we have and come from. Our staff are experts. We consist of former policymakers, law enforcement. I'm also a former law enforcement officer as well, as far as a tax person. And many of our staff have come from the FBI, DEA, and other agencies. We've also worked at the state, county, and local agencies in the state of California, Colorado, and Nevada, and are the first new movers of being the role regulators in those 3 states at the local and state levels. We have 65 years of combined experience with our team. We have reviewed over 4,000 cannabis license applications. And so sometimes you will hear and be criticized for our roles in that, but because of our volume, there is a complexity to that I will talk about in a moment. Next slide. The roles that we are playing for you are technical assistance. We've been there for the staff from the beginning of asked to implement Measure H. We will, if asked, if applicable, assist in the tax ordinance when the time comes. As today, you will see discussion of the cost recovery fee analysis. Application procedures and forms. We've spent a lot of time invested with staff in trying to ensure, as the attorney had mentioned, about making sure you comply with the measure, nothing more, nothing less. Quality control of that process, the integrity of that process, and clear and defined objective processes that. We include as part of that component is applying supplemental background checks. We have done over 4,000 background checks in behalf of our clients as part of that role. And then do the pre-license inspection to ensure that they're in a proper direction when the time comes. So planning is ensured that they're in a good starting point. Next. The Rowan Encinitas application review. Measure X is a quality control process, not merit-based process, which is very difficult, and we'll talk about. City has no discretion over that process, as the attorney had mentioned. The role of HCL is limited to reviewing the application for completeness to pass or fail, and nothing more, as I had indicated to you. City staff will oversee what we do and perform the quality assurance to make sure that there's a separate accountability in what we do and the accuracy of that and the reliability of that information, so they're well informed of the outcome of that. The public lottery will ultimately determine the license and eligibility, not us, not staff, nor you, as regarding as Measure H has reflected. The pros and cons of the lottery versus merit process have been asked to kind of point on a little bit. As I mentioned, HCO has reviewed over 4,000 applications. It does not come without saying that 9 out of 10 applicants will not get a permit, and they get very frustrated with that. There are going to be significant amount of losers who do not have an opportunity to participate during how a process is. This lottery process creates that different tiers of a lottery, A, B, and C bands, and how that criteria is done. So it is going to be frustrating and very difficult, and there will be some concerns regarding that, but we have no say in the outcome of that. And roles that we have played in the past, as I mentioned, 4,000. We've had 3 cities that have been sued. HCL has never been listed, never been sued, emphasis, HCL has never been sued or listed as a plaintiff or petitioner on any lawsuit. It's the mere fact that this process itself creates some frustrations for many people. However, we have had 50 appeals out of those 4,000 applications. That's less than 2% of 1%, or 0.02 of 1%. Of that, and of which those 50, there's been 12 adjustments on those appeals associated with that, from a minimum to a slight adjustment to improve. And in some cases, the change in those scorings did not change the outcome of that process. And I say that because of a situation that has come up that is brought to your attention, and that was related to the Fairfield situation. Unfortunately, the one error that we did make that we took ownership on is in the Fairship situation, where we had an evaluator transposition a scoring element where we had 2 categories. One was an all or none points, and the other one was a 3-component point where you would get some points, but not all of them. And they transpositioned the scoring on those. We brought that to the city's case, although you may read articles and comments made. It was not even understood. The city did not even know that, but when a question was asked, at a diocese one time, we went to validate that and identified the issue, and we self-told the city that we could have not said anything and let it go, but the integrity of us, we did not. And we brought it to the city's attention, and in which case of that, we felt that at that point, we needed to remove ourselves from the process, and we told the city that we were, and that we would refund everything that they were going to have to compensate us for our services. It was not done by the city. We volunteered to that in advance, and that can be validated, although that's not the message you hear on the articles. So it's important to understand that in a merit-based process, the pros and cons of that. In the last 1,000 applications we have, the average score was 96%. The reason people challenge that, because when cities choose to move 5 forward to the council or the next step, and you've got 50 applicants that scored 96%, and the difference between the top applicant and the bottom applicant is 2.5% at best, they're always challenging to get their score changed, so that could go up just 1% or 1.5%, so that they can continue playing the game. And in most cases, the businesses today actually budget to have lawsuits or appeals already in their process, and there's a contingency. So the complexity of a lottery versus merit process cause creations, as you can hear up and down the state. It's not new. Every state, every county, every city that has ever done a merit-based process that limits the number of permits, where not all the applicants that get to a certain point are guaranteed a permit, has been challenged throughout the United States. Our role in it, with or without a staff's role in it or anyone else in it, the conclusions are going to be similar as far as the logistical challenge associated with that and related to merit process. Your process is not that. Your process is very well defined as the purpose as far as what roles in and who gets to make decisions, what can be done and what cannot be done. There is no subjectivity in that process, and that is both a positive and a negative, as other things may come out as losers who those don't get permits will bring to your attention. So with that said, I was just asked to provide you that update, and I'd be more happy to answer any questions at this time if you have anything for me.
Councilmember Mosca.
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your presentation and statement right there. I just have a question in terms of, just preliminary question in terms of lottery versus merit. I understand completely what you're saying, but just want to know, is that within our control? Does the ordinance allow us, Leslie, to decide between a lottery and merit base? Can we decide a lottery, or can we decide a merit-based process?
No, it's spelled out what is a lottery base and what isn't a lottery base, and if I may have Christina Cameron identify that in more particularity.
That's correct. The process that's defined in Measure H provides that after establishing whether applicants or registrants meet certain preferences, that then successive lotteries be held, first with those meeting the most preferences, then if there are any still applicants that could still be obtained, those with fewer than the 3 maximum, and then those with 1. So that is a lottery-based rather than a merit-based. So there's a threshold of certain requirements that any cannabis operator would need to achieve, and that's for the retailers. And then there would be a lottery after establishment of whether the various registrants meet these preferences.
So in some way, you're presenting this compare and contrast because it explains your business, but also at some point that appeals process is also relevant, because I would imagine that before you get to the, who actually can be within the lottery, that could be appealed. So they're scored whatever, and that's below the threshold, and they say, no, you didn't take this into consideration. So that's why you put the compare and contrast in there, even though we don't have a decision on that.
That's part of the council member one is that you will get that, some of the criteria that's going to be an A, B, and C band. People may dispute that, argue it when they are not getting the lottery, and bring that up and bring that to light at some time. The second part of that was because there has been some discussion concerns regarding our role, and I wanted you to recognize the difference between the lottery and the merit-based, where when we go through a merit-based process, the 90% of the people in those processes are not going to get a permit, just to the fact that there's limited numbers, and therefore we get scrutinized on scores, and we are not scoring anything for you. We're doing a quality control to make sure it complies with Measure H in order to move people forward, and whatever the next steps of Measure H reflects and tell us to do.
All right. So, but knowing that's a point where there's contention, you're going to help us put together a process with your experience, put together a process where we have the least amount of conflict in appeals. There's going to be a criteria that's tested throughout the state in terms of what is going to decrease the amount of conflict.
And that is what we work closely with the attorney's office and staff to make sure that we are saying no more or no less what Measure A's gives you the authority to do or not to do, and make sure it's adhered to, and to move that through.
And Councilmember Mosca, what we're going to do further on in the presentation is address some of this, including are working together into the appeal process, and at what point there will be appeals or what point there won't be. We're going to have recommendations in that.
Yeah, and I would like to ask that we, unless there's a critical question at this point, maybe we finish through the presentation. I know we have public speakers on this issue, and then we can have our conversation after we hear from the public as well. So you're complete. Staff's going to take over here? Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Yes, good evening, City Council and members of the public. I'm Evan Jednak, project planner for item 10B regarding the cannabis fees. So a little bit of background. Measure H was the voter initiative approved in 2020 that legalized several cannabis-related uses in certain zones throughout the city. On August 11th, the City Council adopted Ordinance 2021-04 to implement Measure H. And this ordinance was submitted to the Coastal Commission in August and is currently under review. On October 13th, the Coastal Commission approved a one-year time extension on their review. So approval is requested tonight to establish cannabis registration, application, and other regulatory fees. The proposed fees are necessary to offset 100% of city costs associated with regulating the local cannabis industry. A cost recovery analysis was prepared and is included as attachment 2 of the staff report. So registration is required for all cannabis business types. The registration process will check for zoning and sensitive use requirements, proof of property owner authorization for meeting the preference criteria, and will include background checks. The projected cost for providing this service is $6,527.83 per registrant. After completion of the registration process, applicants will be required to submit a business license application. For retailers, only those businesses selected through the lottery will be authorized to proceed to the application process. For non-retail business types, applicants will be authorized to proceed to the application phase immediately upon successful completion of the registration process. The purpose of the application is to verify that all state and local cannabis regulatory requirements are met prior to the issuance of a license. So the projected cost for providing this service is $4,712.38 per applicant. The annual regulatory fee is based on staff oversight from the city manager's office, city attorney's office, development services, finance, fire, and other city departments. Regulatory activities include policy development, program management, public outreach and education, administrative enforcement, coordination with state agencies, and public safety. The total projected cost for providing this service is $12,157.82 per licensee. Other fees are outlined on this slide. Appeals, so cannabis business license denials are subject to appeal in accordance with the Encinitas Municipal Code, Chapter 6.02. Applicants wishing to appeal a denial will be charged a $3,544 fee to offset city costs. Only the applicant can appeal a denial. For the financial audit fee, annual audits of cannabis businesses are required to verify the accuracy of revenues reported to the city. Audits may include a receipt verification, inventory review, point of sale system review, and delinquent payment collection. The city will use an outside consultant to perform the annual audits at a cost of $7,500 per audit. Background checks, so Measure H requires that cannabis business owners complete a criminal background check as part of the business registration process. Any person who has been convicted of a serious or violent felony may not operate, manage, control, or own a cannabis business. A third-party consultant will conduct the background checks. The cost of providing this service is $300 per owner and $100 per employee for the initial background check, and $100 per owner and $75 per employee for annual renewals. The regulatory compliance inspection fee. Periodic on-site inspections of cannabis businesses will be conducted to ensure ongoing compliance with state and local laws. Costs associated with conducting an inspection include conducting the actual inspection, providing recommendations for improvement, and taking enforcement action where needed. Outside consultants will perform this service also at a cost of $1,250 per inspection. Staff has created a cannabis webpage, encinitasca.gov/cannabis, which provides project links, background, status updates, and additional resources. An FAQ document was released to the public and is also linked on the project webpage. Staff is currently developing a GIS-based mapping tool that will show allowable zoning districts and buffers from known sensitive uses. Staff anticipates releasing the map 45 days prior to Coastal Commission approval of the cannabis ordinance and the start of the registration process. The map will be made available for public review for 30 days and will be finalized prior to opening the 30-day business registration window. Staff is planning to conduct a community workshop for residents and businesses to learn about the cannabis business application process and how to file cannabis complaints. This workshop will likely occur in November or December after the processes have been finalized. To notify the public about the community workshops, a workshop notice will be sent to the newspaper, the email sign-up list, the city newsletter, and city social media platforms. Measure H states that a business license for a cannabis or industrial hemp business may be revoked or suspended due to significant loitering, smell, or noise complaints. It is specified that the licensee shall have a reasonable opportunity and time to remedy the issue before being subject to suspension, penalty, or revocation of the business license. Planning staff will work with code enforcement to develop procedures for filing complaints regarding pesticide drift, odor, and other code enforcement issues. While the Code Enforcement Division will address cannabis complaints within the city, state agencies such as the Department of Cannabis Control have their own enforcement processes that may be of use to the public. So staff will develop materials instructing the public which city and or state agencies to contact regarding cannabis-related concerns. So public outreach and code enforcement were two of the primary concerns brought up by the public and the city council, but other topics of concern include odor management, signage, transfer of ownership, sensitive uses, topographic barriers, and limitations on what can be sold. These issues are addressed in a memo from the city attorney's office, which is attachment 3 of the staff report. And the city attorney's office is here tonight and can address questions regarding their legal memo. And so the recommended action, staff recommends that the council adopt resolution 2021-94, a resolution of the City of Encinitas City Council establishing cannabis business registration, application, and other regulatory fees. This concludes the presentation.
Thank you. So if there are no really preliminary questions, we will now move into public speakers, public comment.
And Mayor, or Deputy Mayor, we do have 7. I'll call you each three at a time. The first 3 speakers, Nancy Logan, followed by Kelly McCormick, followed by Peggy Walker.
Hello again. I have a copy of the agenda report here, and I tried to read quite a bit of it. First, I want to clarify an item on the first page. Under background, it says that Measure H was placed on the ballot through a petition by Encinitas voters. I've said it before, and I'm going to say it over and over again. We all know that is inaccurate. This measure was brought by out-of-town investors trying to profit in Encinitas, and they paid signature gatherers to lie to the voters to get them to sign. And I saw that over and over again at every store I went to, and I'm sure you did too. Anyway, and you know I've asked questions at previous meetings, and this does answer some of the questions, which I'm very grateful for, but I do have a few concerns. It says that the registration process will require proof the property owner has authorized the proposed cannabis activity on their site. I'm really happy to see that. However, I don't see the notification process for the neighboring businesses. How and when will they be able to find out if there's a marijuana business coming in next to them, next door, or in their building? How are the neighbors going to know? I don't see anything about that. And also the report says that community outreach, as he said, will be factored into the registration cost. Well, we need those now, not after the businesses are up and running. Please provide us residents and businesses with the workshop before this happens, before it goes into effect. And there's many steps the city could take to further safeguard public health, such as additional sensitive use designations, limiting the types of products that can be sold, and as he spoke about, establishing an odor management framework. So there's more than fee structured embedded into this agenda report. So I respectively suggest that this item be postponed until after the public workshops. They say they're going to be in November, December. Then we can look at this and vote on this. Thank you very much.
Good evening, this is Kelly McCormick. I'm a public health educator with a focus on alcohol, tobacco, and drug prevention for youth. As you consider how to safeguard public safety while enacting Measure H, I hope you will work with the Sheriff's Department on a plan for minor decoy operations at marijuana retail storefronts. As you know, the Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control conducts minor decoy operations at bars and liquor stores. Yet the State Department of Cannabis Control has not done a single minor decoy operation in the 4 years since it began permitting marijuana businesses, nor are there any plans to do so. It falls to local jurisdictions to conduct enforcement operations. In addition, there should be required training on this for marijuana storefront employees. For example, I recently provided required training for people serving alcohol at a special event. The curriculum covers how to distinguish a fake ID from a valid one, tips for identifying a person who is already intoxicated, and a reminder that ABC inspectors could show up at any time. Unfortunately, the Department of Cannabis Control is not doing any of these things. I hope that you will step in. Finally, I ask that you schedule a public workshop before voting on this item. Transparency is paramount to public health, and there are many issues still to be resolved. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Peggy Walker. I work in youth health education and youth advocacy, and I agree with the first speaker who said there is so much in this. Could we put off a vote until after those public workshops? I came tonight to address, it's page 17 of the report, the staff report, item number 5, and that refers to limitations on what can be sold. And I would like to ask for you to prohibit or ban the sale of branded marijuana merchandise. I heard the city attorney say that we cannot change the ordinance, but we can clarify it. And there's no clarification on the sale of branded merchandise, so that I believe you could go in there and prohibit it. I want to share it with you. What I brought tonight are some samples of branded marijuana merchandise from a company called Cookies. It's a large national company with stores in San Diego County. And if you look at it, it looks innocent or harmless enough, but it is not, because kids look at this kid who comes to school with a Cookies trucker hat on and says, "Oh, Cookies, what's that? It's my new favorite brand of pot." Oh, well, that looks harmless enough. It looks safe. It looks exciting. They're enticed by the Cookies logo, and they decide to try, and that begins that pernicious cycle of experimentation and dependency that we want to avoid. I hope you will not underestimate the impact of this type of branded merchandise on initiating youth marijuana use. It's very strong. Parents in La Mesa and Mission Valley, where there are 2 of these cookie stores, and there's another one proposed in Sereno Valley. Parents have been very strongly opposed to the name of the store, Cookies, and to their branded merchandise because it's so misleading. People have gone into these stores thinking they're bakeries and have taken their kids in there only to find out that they're pot shops. Storefront businesses might say, well, it's not fair for us not to be able to sell branded merchandise in our storefronts, but they can sell online. This company, Cookies, has a website with 47 pages of branded merchandise, and it includes things like T-shirts and hoodies and caps and other things, including odor-free lunch bags. But I hope you will consider a ban on those branded products. We don't want our kids walking around looking like advertisements for pot shops in town. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speakers are Will Cregan, Kathleen Lippett, and then Becky Rapp.
Hi, council members. I'm not going to raise this because it'd probably take the better part of 3 minutes to get it up here. I come to you today. I think you hooked up with the right guys here. I'm glad that you've done that because I think the most important thing is making sure that the implementation of this ordinance is done correctly. I bought my first house here in 1989. I've been a long-term resident in Encinitas. My kids have gone to school here. I love this place, and I think that it's really important to me that this is implemented correctly, and I like the ideas of public outreach. I like the ideas of minor decoys. I mean, all of that's going to keep these on the up and up. I also come to you as a guy that's had 7 surgeries, broken arm, broken leg, back surgeries, hand surgeries, you name it. I deal with pain on a daily basis. I have, throughout this period of time, they've tried to feed me fentanyl, oxycodone, and Vicodin, and all these things, which made me completely unproductive. I've been a real estate broker for 36 years here in San Diego County. I'm an investor here in Encinitas. We've got 7 multifamily properties here in Encinitas. We've got 28 throughout the county. I run a property management firm here, and I've been a productive citizen. I am also a cannabis user to get rid of and fight off the pain. So I don't look like your typical young stoner kid walking around, and I don't act like that. I try to be a good father, a good husband, a good business owner, and someone that adds to his city and doesn't take away. I'm also going to be applying for one of these, and you know, God willing, we'll get one. The only thing that I wanted to ask you to take a look at is, and I certainly don't want to try to step on your livelihood, gentlemen, but there is a $2,500 HDL fee for review of registration materials. You guys are handling the site qualifications, so there basically is owner approval, responsible person or cannabis retail approval, pharmacy owner approval, and city-run business approval. I don't know the ins and outs of what they do, but I review people for our apartments and things like that on a daily basis. And, you know, even if this was 2.5 or 3 hours of work for $2,500, I mean, I don't make $900 an hour, and I don't think any of us, you know, here do. I would hope that, you know, you as the city council would look closely at that just to see, you know, where the money is being spent, and if it truly needs to be spent, then that's fine. I'm good with that. But anyway, that was it. Thank you for listening.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. My name is Kathleen Lippett, and I'm a public health practitioner. Industry initiatives like Measure L are fraught with unexpected and unintended harms that the public and political electeds are often unlikely to appreciate. It's unfortunate when political electeds don't make sure that the public is made aware of the genesis and potential drawbacks of these often outsider industry promoted initiatives. Some cities have been successful at using existing codes and expanding them or clarifying their intent. Contrary to the staff assertions, cities can adopt regulations that are stricter than those of the state, using their land use authority. An example is ownership transfers, which the state allows, but cities can restrict or prohibit. Cities can require subsequent ownership transfers to get back in line for a permit. A recent example of allowing transfer of ownerships was in Carmel Valley, where an existing and previously vetted business was bought out by a new business that happened to be a Cookies as well. Cookies had brought out, that would never have been approved by the city or the planning group because of their name. Contrary to Cookies' assertion that they don't target children, their name was chosen to promote their most popular marijuana strain, Girl Scout cookies. And in closing, the request for postponing this item and providing an opportunity for the public to address these concerns in a workshop, I think, is a wonderful idea. And thank you very much for your time.
Next speaker is Becky Rapp, followed by Judy Strang.
Good evening. My name is Becky Rapp. I am a parent and a youth group mentor supporting youth who live in Encinitas and who attend local churches. I appreciate the previous comments regarding the branded merchandise and the Cookies logo. I was actually, interestingly, dropping my son off his football uniform Tuesday at a nearby high school, and there was one other child waiting out front to meet his mother, and he had a black hoodie on that said Cookies across the front. So this is truly a concern. I appreciate staff's work on breaking down the ordinance to provide legal review and guidance. I would like to speak directly to page 17, item 4, under the city attorney's memorandum, sensitive uses. Measure H does not include churches as a sensitive use. Under state law, daycare centers and youth centers and with a current license are protected. According to the staff report, youth center means any public or private facility that is primarily used to host recreational or social activities for minors. It seems to me that a church would fall under this criteria, although they are not listed, implying that a marijuana business could potentially locate next door to a church. This is deeply concerning to churches across the entire county who have been fighting tirelessly to protect their congregations from the normalcy and commercialization of marijuana. Families utilize the church sites for childcare and social gatherings. Churches are also a place that often distribute food, clothing, and housing to families and their children. It seems that in the spirit of sensitive uses mentioned in Measure H, that churches could be included. Although I know that Measure H's wording cannot be changed, it seems completely within the purview of Encinitas to have a list of sensitive uses that it would want to be protected. Our coalition of churches wonders if Encinitas Municipal Code could be augmented to protect the religious community as the sensitive use it most certainly is. Thank you.
Good evening. On behalf of San Diego Alliance and several of the speakers, we'd like to suggest respectfully that the decision tonight be postponed until you could have a public workshop. As you will note, the fees that are suggested are broken out for you, and that tells you what these fees are going to cover. Each of these items that are going to be covered by the fees, in and of themselves, have a lot of questions in them. This is not simply a proposal of fees. This is a proposal about activities. And it would be really wise for us to let our community be able to address at least the activities described under each of the fees. I bring this concern to you because San Diego Alliance co-facilitates a group, a marijuana prevention group, a countywide group, and has done it since 2005, which means, along with our colleagues, we have watched carefully what happens when each city has had to deal with the outcomes of initiatives forced on them, like you are. So we have a really good insight of where problems begin. And we can tell you that you could save yourself a lot of grief if you had a community workshop before you went anywhere with these fees. If it were simply dollars, that would be one thing. But that's not what's listed here. It's what these fees have as activities listed associated with them. So my recommendation is that we have the time, because we understand that the Coastal Commission has given, or you have sought, a 12-month extension on that decision. So I suspect there'll be some time before it even comes back from the Coastal Commission. So I think this would be just the best use of time to, so that we can answer these questions. You've heard some of our concerns already from parents, but there are many more. And I think it would be a gift to all of us if we could do that. I was going to go through some of the things that I was particularly concerned about that parents have mentioned to me. What I would want to tell you is that we have a lot of sources of information. I want you to understand we have 4 large youth programs. And so we get input from not only our youth regarding what are going on in our community, but from their parents. We also are very much involved in the parent community. I have served on the North Coastal Council PTA for about 15 years. And in fact, our concern regarding marijuana use and subsequent mental health problems is culminated in a parent forum we are doing San Diego region-wide on November 12th. And in addition to our work as co-facilitating this countywide group, my point is that we don't bring these concerns to you idly, and we would really respectfully ask if you could postpone this decision tonight until we could have a community workshop. Thank you.
That does conclude speakers.
Councilmember Mosca.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you to all the speakers and the public comments that we've received. So, so the recommended action is adopt resolution number 2021-94 titled A Resolution of the City of Encinitas City Council Establishing Cannabis Business Registration Application and Other Regulatory Fees. The fees are attached. It also outlines a cost recovery. We're asking for 100% cost recovery, meaning that all of the services that we provide, the taxpayers will not foot the bill, but that the people that are actually submitting applications will actually pay that. So we've done our analysis. Just like we do with other fees in our city, we basically do a cost recovery analysis and we set that percentage, and we have experts that come and do that analysis. And so that we have the fees all listed here: registration fee, application fee, annual regulatory fee, appeal process fee, initial owner background investigation fee, owner background investigation renewal fee, initial employee background investigation fee, all at 100% cost recovery, employee background investigation renewal fee, financial audit fee, compliance inspection fees. And then the resolution is listed in this staff report, which basically says everything about fees and nothing about some of the other things that have been said tonight. There's a legal analysis that's in the staff report that is not necessarily, that analysis isn't necessarily being approved by this item. This item is proving a resolution for fees, but that analysis is in there because public has come to our city council meetings posing questions to us over the last several months. And so this staff report attempts to be responsive to a lot of the questions that have been raised. And so the legal analysis is exactly where the city stands in terms of some of those issues. And so, but with regard to that, we can continue having that conversation. The fees are set, again, by professionals that come and say, okay, this is how much it's going to cost to do this, and this is what it is. But all the other stuff in terms of branding, I'm not sure, and we can pose those questions and continue to have that conversation. He's saying no, but that's not set tonight. That legal analysis can continue on, but this is just about the fees tonight. There was one question about the fees, which was relevant to tonight's topic, and that is the $2,500. So I will pose that question to the professionals that put this together. Can you, since somebody did ask that question, can you explain to us why it costs $2,500 to process that?
Go ahead, AJ.
Hi, my name is Jay Kaluri. I'm the Deputy Director of Policy and Audit with HDL. The application review fee is our standard fee that we charge to cities for application reviews. That does include the cost of reviewing each application, which is much more intensive than a typical business license application review. There are a lot more materials that are required by both the state as well as the Measure H ordinance. But in addition, that cost includes development of the application and registration fees, or application registration materials. The Encinitas process is a two-step process. So there is both a registration for retailers, a lottery, and then an application afterwards to perform due diligence of the businesses before they're licensed. It is an intensive process, both development of those materials, working with city staff, working with your city attorney to ensure that all of the materials are defensible. We try to make sure that they are quality materials that are not challenged at any point throughout the process. And we do significant due diligence in application review itself, which includes review not just of the application materials, but also of the business owners, background checks of the business owners. We do reviews of the property owners to ensure that they approve of a cannabis business applying from that location, as well as other requirements. So it's not comparable to a normal business license application review. Fortunately, it's a one-time expense that is passed on to the applicants themselves.
So just two follow-up questions. So you've put together in the analysis how many hours it approximately takes. Can you just estimate how many hours that it takes to process that application?
Are you familiar with the actual application reviews themselves?
And also, while you're there, how does that compare to, I know that there's never, kind of apples to apples, but how does that compare to the market, if you will, of application fees? Are we really high? Are we really low? Are we in the median?
You're actually low. The average in the last, from COVID, well, the COVID doesn't really have a factor on the reviewing of it. I would say the last year and a half, the fees now are $10,000 to $12,000.
Right.
So they're significantly, but because this is an initiative, it's limiting on what you do on the review. As Mr. Clory said, you're looking at limited access, you're looking at security diagrams, you're looking at security contracts, you're looking at information of SOPs to make sure they comply with state requirements, health requirements, the public health requirements, security of products, security of staff, safety plans, the qualifications, the financial documents of businesses, because you can have these, multi-layers of ownerships to make sure that you're vetting through those to identify you actually have the people you think on there. So that is where that fee comes into, is dividing it, our cost. So it's just cost recovery of our time that we've estimated for this process.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Lyons.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor Kranz. I see that our staff and our attorneys understand the process, and our consultant has a lot of experience, and they understand the process. And responding to Councilmember Mosca's question, I just learned a lot more than I knew about what the application process is like. So I think many of us understand what the scope of work is that goes into these fees, and so I can see why we're here today, because we believe we understand it, And we know it well enough to put together fees. So I don't think that's wrong, but when I'm here listening, I'm hearing that we haven't had the opportunity to have that dialogue with the public. And I'm not even sure, we're on the same page enough yet to even be confident that the work we're embracing, that these fees are going to cover, is absolutely correct. And so maybe because we know this, we're smart about it, but because we're kind of getting the cart ahead of the horse here with establishing fees, I wonder if the optics is not quite right. That we do want to talk broadly with the public and get input to make sure we're well informed. Perhaps it will result in the same fees ultimately, but we will have vetted it and we will have dialogued with the public so that the public then comes on board with understanding the processes as well as staff and our attorneys do. So I'm definitely leaning towards not needing to rush this. Now, if someone can tell me why we need to, I'll listen to it, and I see that you're interested in talking.
I may, Mayor. So I appreciate the community's input, and I think that's very valuable and important to you as a role in recognizing that. I think what's important, and it may be an attorney's thing, is the initiative says unreasonable cost burdens to the city on the cannabis business and unreasonable regulatory. Although some of the things that were brought up tonight are good practices, and if this was a city-adopted ordinance, you can do best practices, deal with good policy from the perspective of the community, and that outreach becomes a huge value to that degree. The concern is the initiative. We address it from the initiative, and I'll defer to the attorney for detail, but it's those unreasonable things. Asking anything, as we've mentioned earlier, anything more or anything less, you will then be violating of this H, and there will be some concerns regarding what comes in, addressing those for at least the first 3 years. After your first 3 years, you can modify things that can ask other things of consideration. And again, I'll defer to your city council or city attorney for clarification on those issues.
Okay, but I understand what you're saying. I understand you're saying there's no variation here. This is what it is. But I want to go back to optics because we haven't talked to the public yet. And I wonder if, in this case, we don't need to rush. I'm not saying we don't go set fees soon, but I'm just going to look to my council members to see if they have any support for this direction of tabling for now.
Well, I think table is probably the wrong word, but delay for more public input is something that I'd be inclined to support. But I think it's important to have staff or the city manager or the city attorney detail what 30 days would cost us if we waited to adopt these fees.
Okay, if I can kind of start on this, I know that there's a lot of requests to have workshops, et cetera, and I wanted to point out that the city is tasked under the election code and also in Measure H to make sure to implement and enact this without delay, and that includes fees. So there's a whole process that has to happen, including when you took the ordinance and you submitted it to the Coastal Commission for the LCP. And so that is already being cooked. That's already happening right now. So if the Coastal Commission were to come down and say, all right, we're good, you're in a position of being told immediately, you need to make this happen. You have to have fees in place. You have to have procedures in place. And if you don't, we run the risk of being sued for that. I will also say that the specifics of the fees by law, of course, you can't have fees that are higher than the actual services, or otherwise it's an ineffectual fee or a tax, as you probably know. So there was a lot of work and effort by staff to the penny, figure out exactly what it cost to do the job that needed to happen to make this activity legal under the election code as well as under Measure H that has then been submitted to the Coastal Commission. So it's all a time thing. The people in the position best to tell you, probably in my opinion, legally the only position to tell you, are those who do it. In other words, staff can tell you how long it takes, HDL can tell you how long it takes, et cetera. Attorneys can tell you how long we're going to take per everything. As much as the public wants to know what it takes for the fees, this is kind of hard to say politically to the public, but their subjective thought on whether it's too much or too expensive isn't what's going to make the day, at the end of the day, if you get challenged on the fees or that it's not going quick enough or timely enough. So while I understand there might be a lot of public concern relative to other issues that aren't before you tonight that can certainly be addressed by our office and staff, I think it's very important that this process keeps going, and I believe that it could be subject to legal challenge if it looks like the city says we're going to let the public determine what our costs are or talk about what the costs are, and it could be determined to be unreasonable delay. I don't know if staff has any other additions to that.
No, I don't have anything in addition to that. I will just say that we do not know at this time when Coastal will bring this forward. So if they did bring this forward in December, we would be hitting a time issue, because even once we finish these fees, we still have to finish the development of the materials and get it into our systems and get everything ready to actually be public. And so that's what we're concentrating on right now, is finishing up these materials so that we can have a more engaged public workshop that we do plan to have after Thanksgiving, because we're still finalizing what that looks like and making sure that we do understand what we need to do with Measure H as far as what needs to be submitted and get as detailed as possible so we can provide as much information to the public as we can. And definitely understand this ordinance, which we are with the public in when we first looked at it too, of like, okay, what does that mean? What does this mean? How are we going to do this? How does that work? And so we're trying to work that all out. When we came to the fees, it is all based on Measure H and what it says we can and cannot do. And those times were applied based on that Measure H. That's what I'll say.
I guess one of my frustrations here is that I think, it's been pretty clearly established that we have a dedicated group of community members that are very interested in the development of every aspect of this ordinance. And they want to, where they can, participate, provide feedback, to include issues that are essentially defined by the measure itself. But the whole behind the magic curtain aspect of this is a little troubling to the public, and it also troubles me. And so I look in the staff report, and it says here, staff is planning to conduct a community workshop for residents and businesses to learn about the cannabis business application process, vetting locations, and the process for filing cannabis complaints. Such workshop will likely occur in November or December 2021, after the processes have been finalized. And indeed, the key is they want to have some input. They don't want it to be finalized. And all I can say is that the disaster that has been Measure H is on display here tonight. The energy that is going into developing this ordinance that passed by a ballot measure has been tremendous. I mean, Councilmember Mosca mentioned that the fees are an effort to recover the costs of permitting, which is good. I want to do that. But the costs that the city has spent in order to get to this point have been significant. We've got a relatively expensive consultant, we've got X number of staff members, and we've got a dozen members of the public here. And we're only getting started. So I appreciate what you're saying, but I think that the key here is a little transparency and public participation. So for me, I'm leaning towards Councilmember Lyons' request to postpone until the public can be engaged and know the details of the fees. Councilmember Mosca.
So I understand what you're saying, and I do get what everybody has been saying in the audience, and I do think that we should do everything we can to engage the members of the public that want to talk about this. And I think that HDL kind of summarized it and said, you know, if this was something that we had done, if this was a resolution that we had passed, we would have more flexibility. And this is a citizen initiated ballot, and so it's a little bit more restrictive, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be reaching out and making sure we're engaging them. And I think we should. And maybe we should even have the workshop that's sooner than that. But I think we're making a mistake if we conflate the two. Tonight, we're talking about fees. Tonight, it's a very technical thing, and we're moving on and putting this ordinance in place. The thing that we're doing is we're looking at fees. And having more public meetings on fees doesn't make it any more reasonable. What makes it reasonable are the professionals going through it and saying, okay, how much time does it take to process an application? What's the cost to doing that? And so they put a fee together. In fact, you open it up to any more public comment on these fees and say that, well, no, it should be $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000, then that gets away from what the professionals actually put together in terms of what makes sense for cost recovery. I'm all for 100% cost recovery so that our taxpayers aren't footing the bill. And I'm also wanting to talk to HDL and others about putting a ballot initiative out there that's going to tax cannabis as well. And so I want to make sure that not only are we basically getting 100% cost recovery, but that we're getting additional revenue from it. All right, so I think that tonight is the first step in making sure that we're in compliance with the ordinance. And that is essentially passing a very technical resolution that just sets fees to make sure that the city is recovering for the services that it's outlaying. But the public outreach needs to continue. And on all the issues that were brought up today about branding and everything else, that's not in this agenda item tonight. That's not in the agenda item tonight. And I think we need to continue talking about that. If legally we can do it, we'll get the analysis, just like this staff report had addressed all the items that have been brought up in the past. If legally we can do it, then we ought to do it. And so we'll look at all those, and we'll look to you to make sure that you're helping us inform us of what we ought to be looking at. And staff, we should be sitting down with them sooner and engaging with them sooner so that we're taking into consideration what we ought to be, how this ordinance, all the regulations should look like. But I'm going to move this resolution, move resolution number 2021-94 and staff's recommendation.
I'll second that. I tend to agree with Councilmember Mosca's comments. I think I'm still left with a lot of questions, including can our fee structure include payment for decoy operations? You know, a lot of noticing requirements. Nancy Logan brought up when will the neighboring businesses be noticed about that. But I do understand that that's not what we're considering tonight, and what we are considering is the fee structure. And I would rather have the fee structure in place so that we can start recouping or understanding some of the staff time, some of the costs, and some of the expense to the city that we have had and that we will have as this moves forward.
Councilmember Lyons.
I think the only thing I wanted to say, and maybe just reiterate, is that I don't think that waiting 30 to 60 days sounds like there's a lot of risk. And also, I don't think that the public workshop will change the fees presented. But I just think it's an optics, that it's a matter of timing, and we do want to position ourselves to just meet a high standard of transparency for the public. And I think there's going to have to be a lot of dialogue here and a lot of understanding about this process, and we're just not there yet. So, you know, for us to move forward with fees now just seems like not quite the right step, not quite the right timing. Not that this presentation of fees is incorrect. It's not. It's a timing thing.
Is there anything about the fees that were established that is proprietary and secret? Or could you provide a line item, here's the bottom line, and it's like in a spreadsheet where it says it's going to take X number of hours to, read the application, et cetera, et cetera? Is there secrets that we don't want to reveal to the public about how the fees were established?
No.
There's no secret. But also, it's important to note that this is just the baseline for our understanding of the process today. The fees could be adjusted at any time. Throughout the process, if we discover that there are other, for instance, the decoy operation, if that is something that is of interest to the council and could be incorporated into the fees, that we could bring that back at a later date and incorporate that into the fee. And we establish new fees based on those new processes. It's important for us I would reiterate what the city attorney indicated, and that is the implication and the risk of, unfortunately, we're at the mercy of the Coastal Commission. We don't know what their timeline is. But once they issue their approval, we're obligated under Measure 8 to move and start the process. Unfortunately, it takes a lot of time for us, staff, to establish and put together all the materials, the application materials, and incorporate that into our system in order for our applicants to submit their requests, which is why we're here before you tonight to establish the fees based on the processes that we've laid out in order to establish the fee. If it's adopted tonight, then we will move forward with the establishment and putting together all the materials that we need in order to start the process, the registration process, including finalizing the map that we mentioned in the staff report, so we can release that. Unfortunately, if we don't move forward tonight, that would delay that as well. So I just wanted to put out there, I recognize and acknowledge the importance of public outreach. I agree 100%, yes, we need to engage our community. We need to get them involved and informed of the process. As you mentioned, the workshop is not going to change the process. It's not going to reveal any new thing that's going to change the fees. The purpose of the workshop is to inform the public. Unfortunately, Measure H has laid out the process for us. So our goal in the workshop is to have all the application materials, better understand and formulate the process so that we can inform the public in terms of their involvement in the process, which would only be how they can file a complaint. This is the process to do that. Unfortunately, in terms of the registration and the business application and the appeal process, as it laid out in Measure H, there's not much involvement that is included for the public in those processes. The most involved portion is the complaint, and that's something that we're working on. How can we better create a system that is convenient and user-friendly and accessible to the public to make to file complaints? So that's the only input I would like to share with the council. And
were these fees, were the process and the hours that were involved in them, were these established by other jurisdictions and we just picked up the tasks from these other jurisdictions, or was this a process that we established our own schedule?
So I can respond to that. The fees themselves are defined by Measure H. So Measure H.
Well, but by name, these are the various categories of fees. Is that what you're talking about?
So what goes into each one of the fees is based on the process that's outlined in Measure H. They're fairly standard fees for a cannabis application process, application, background checks, pre-license inspections, et cetera. We do not have in the report that was provided a comparison analysis to other jurisdictions, but we can say that the range of fees for Encinitas are comparable to other cities that have adopted fee schedules for cannabis applications and annual regulatory fees as well. And I would also add that the fees do include a line item summary for all the services that are involved that total to the.
Somebody has that somewhere, but that wasn't part of the report. Is that correct?
Yes, the number of hours and the who are in the Excel spreadsheet,
Yeah, and it's, but not part of the.
not included as part of the attachment.
Yeah.
So staff went through and identified the who, went and identified the who, and then found the full cost recovery fee for that individual, and then applied that. And then Roy, myself, and Evan went through and identified how much time those would take.
And so right now with Coast Commission, we have an LCP amendment in the works, is that correct?
That's correct.
And then the LCP amendment will be notified that amendment's going to be on a Coastal Commission agenda on such and such a date. Normally, how much advance notice do we have that it's going to be on a Coastal Commission agenda?
It's usually, we'll find out no more than 30 days in advance, if we're lucky in terms of coordinating with coastal staff.
So if this were to come back to us, what are we have a public workshop that people can see the spreadsheets and understand what the process is involved and maybe ask questions about the whole thing. And is that something that would take months or weeks or days? How long would that take?
So our intent of the workshop is not just to discuss fees. Our intent of the workshop is to discuss the process.
Right, but so let's assume we just did a fee workshop. How long would that take to organize? The folks here are feeling like they would like to have some sense of what went into that. And so if we were going to have that hearing.
If that is the primary focus of the workshop is just the fees, we'll discuss and potentially maybe get something in the books in 3 to 4 weeks.
Okay. There is a motion on the floor, so we will take a vote. Oh, wait, Councilmember Hinsey, did you want to speak again?
Yes, I would. So, I think part of what we took part in tonight was to hear from the public about what should be included in the fees. And so what I hear from our staff is that should we need to revise these fees, we do have the option to do so based on new information that we might have. And so as part of what my hope is that we can consider some of the suggestions that we received tonight as we recalibrate for fees if necessary, and it included to include minor decoy operations if possible, to include a noticing requirement for neighboring businesses to when that property would be turned over to retail or whatever the use is, and that we are really getting these code enforcement costs right too, because I think in the exploration of what's going on with our short-term vacation rentals, we've uncovered some difficulties in holding businesses accountable. So it's really important to me that if we're seeing that we need to be recovering more of the costs for our code enforcement process, that we're doing so. And also that, currently you have to have a signed statement when you issue a code complaint. And I think that there should be an alternative to that process too, because I don't think that you should have to put your name on a code complaint if you are wanting to report a business. So I would just add those on to what our comments are here tonight to make sure that we've captured some of the community's feedback on this item. And then I did just have one last question, and it is about the cost of the fee for an appeal, and it's $3,544 for an applicant to appeal the decision. And I'm curious to know if that would be the same cost to a member of the public who is going to attempt an appeal of a license? Or do we not know that at this time?
The public does not have the ability to appeal a business application.
Got it. Thank you.
Councilmember Mosca.
Yeah, so I agree with Councilmember Hinsey, and I think that if we discuss and get input on other areas that we believe are going to be a commitment of resources by the city then we can look at that in terms of having a fee. We would have to basically talk to the attorneys and say whether or not, because I don't even think that those fees can actually be fees, because I don't know that you can, a private business has a say, unless they have a contractual agreement. They don't have a say in who's located next to them. And maybe like Walmart and Target can say, I don't want any other business in this place, and they have a contractual obligation or something there that says that they can. But for the most part, I'm not aware of how a private business would say, you know, I don't want this other private business next to me. But I think that that's not even something that we have to debate here tonight, because I think that to the extent that we've heard some more stuff about additional fees, we could talk to the attorneys and the professionals and say, okay, are these reasonable fees that we can actually put in place? And then what is the cost recovery that we can put in place? And then they'll do the cost recovery analysis and come back with a whole new fee if we want to do that. But I think that what we have tonight are the fees that are in compliance with this measure and that are reasonable in terms of the 100% cost recovery. And I'd suggest that a lot of the things that were brought up here tonight are not necessarily having to do with the fees, other than the two items there. They're more about branding and wanting to be a part of the process and make sure it's transparent. And I think that what's being said is that process is still going on. And so all the things that you're talking about is signage and everything else. That's not the question tonight. The question tonight is solely about fees. And so I respectfully say that we'll continue the dialogue, continue to make sure, just like the legal letter was in here tonight, because we asked the city attorney, what about signs? What can we do with this? What can we do? And I'm committed to making sure that we continue to raise those questions, and that we're not putting the city on a bullseye, but we're basically doing what we can do to protect our city, protect our residents, protect our youth, and make sure that folks that want cannabis have access to cannabis, as this measure has outlined. And so I just continue to say that I think that what we ought to do is pass this ordinance tonight, as my motion states.
Councilmember Lyons.
I think we've been really, I think this dialogue has actually been really important, so thank you. I think it's imperative for us to be very thoughtful about being transparent and just having the dialogue with the community. And I think our dialogue here today has reinforced how important that is. So I'm happy that we've had this dialogue. I think that, Roy, you saying that we can recalibrate, and it sounds like perhaps we do want to think about fees a little bit more based on Councilmember Hinsey's comments, and I support those. So perhaps if we look at this as, these are some baseline fees, we understand, and we're going to continue the dialogue, and we're going to engage the community, and we're going to be transparent, and it's imperative for us to do this. It's going to be it's just going to make it more successful for everyone. So if we can do that, capture the community's feedback today, and then recalibrate fees in the future if necessary, then I can support moving this forward today.
Okay, I see no reason not to delay, so I will not be supporting the motion. I think that the opportunity for continued dialogue and to answer questions related to these fees would be very valuable. So with that, we'll have a vote.
Motion carries with Crayons voting no and Blakespeare absent.
Okay, thank you all. So with that, we have no 11A, no informational items. That has been postponed to a future date. And with that, we will now handle item 12A, a council member initiated item from Mayor Blakespeare requesting council approval of an offshore oil drilling resolution.
And I will actually be taking this tonight, and because our mayor is not here. And so I hope this is a no-brainer for us. We've recently experienced tar balls showing up here on our beaches, and it's quite a concern for the community, the businesses that rely on our beaches for tourism. and the folks who come to Encinitas to enjoy our beaches. So essentially, this item before us tonight is to support Congressman Levin's bill, which is HR, I'll read the full name. It's the American Coast and Oceans Protection Act. It's authored by Mike Levin, and it would prohibit any new leasing for the exploration, development, or production of oil or natural gas along the Southern California coast, all the way from San Diego County to the border of San Luis Obispo County. And so it appears that for the last couple of decades, we've been operating on short-term moratoriums on new permits for oil exploration and drilling. And so what this bill would effectively ban future drilling, offshore drilling forever. So, and it also states that we would support the decommissioning of existing oil platforms and the 208 miles of pipeline that connect them to the shore. So, and that we would support economic training programs for workers affected by the transition to renewable energy sources so that we're not losing any jobs by decommissioning unsafe oil platforms. So I would move approval if my colleagues see that this is a good use of our platform here.
I second that, and would add, as the old man here, I was too young to really remember I think it was 69 Santa Barbara mess that happened, but I was in the National Guard in Alaska when the Exxon Valdez struck the reef and spilled all its contents and destroyed that bay. And made an absolute mess of Alaska, and it really is frustrating because we haven't really learned. I was at the EcoFest, and there was the opportunity to hear speakers, talking about hope and how frustrating it can be to run across these sort of situations all the time, and just feels a little bit like we're banging our head against the wall. It just keeps happening and happening, and I think it's really time to leave that stuff in the ground. So I appreciate the mayor for bringing this forward, and will wholeheartedly endorse it.
Motion carries unanimously with Blake Spear absent.
Okay, thank you. With that, we move on to council member reports pursuant to AB 1234.
I have nothing to report except for that we had a wonderful ribbon cutting event for the new water campus, and I thank all of my colleagues for attending. Both council members past and present were there, and it was a really wonderful event, and I loved seeing all of you on your bikes on that new bike trail.
Yes, and it would be good to get an update on when that bike trail will be connecting to Birmingham. So if there's any way of knowing that, that would be great.
I'll take care of finding out the answer to that.
And with that, we have city manager reports.
I did want to just make one comment. And so I went to that as well, and I had a fun time. It was really great to see that facility, the ribbon cutting on that, and it opened up, since it's something that we had been talking about for a while and planning for a while, so it was great to be there. I did want to say that I had mentioned before that the Encina Wastewater Authority, Joy and I sit on that board of directors. The other wastewater authority, that we had our general manager retire this past month, and we've been in the process of looking for a new general manager, and I sit on the ad hoc committee for the recruitment of another general manager. And we had the profile put together in concert with the help of staff, and hired an executive recruiter, and the brochure went out. We had about 50 applicants for this position, and we have now narrowed it down to 7 of the top candidates, and the ad hoc committee will next couple of weeks interview those candidates, and then recommend 2 to 3 to the board of directors for consideration. And so we do have some really amazing folks there. So I think we're gonna, in about a month, I think I'm gonna be making an announcement that we have a really amazing person for general manager of Encina Wastewater. Authority, which is really going to match the new mission, potable reuse, and all of the environmental goals that we now have. I think that we're going to have somebody that is really going to help lead this organization, Encino Wastewater Authority, and really help us meet all of our goals. So,
I would like to ask that you let Joy make that announcement.
the announcement of who the general manager is?
As a Encino rep, yes.
Well, I'll just add that Joe's done a great job on that ad hoc committee, so he's been pulling
City
the
manager
heavyweight there.
reports? City attorney reports?
No other to say it's really nice to be back in person.
Yep.
And we'll get you the opioid litigation update.
Okay, very good.
So
City clerk? Oh.
I just want to say, so just, I don't know what the implication of that was, but you know that, so Joy and I sit on the board, and I sit on the ad hoc committee. So Joy's not understanding of this because she doesn't sit on the ad hoc committee. So I'm explaining, so I'm not sure that
I understand the explanation point, but you were going to be announcing it, and I assumed that the whole board would make that decision. So I thought, well, since you got to tell
Sure.
us about the process, maybe she could tell us.
She could announce it.
Yeah.
All right, perfect, sounds good.
Very democratic.
City clerk reports?
Yes, I just wanted to remind everyone that we do have 2 vacancies on the Environmental Commission. Those applications are available online. And then we also have 1 vacancy on the Urban Forest Advisory Committee, and those applications are available online as well.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, we are adjourned to the next meeting, which will be held on October 27th, 2021.